Oh, okay, he's back down at the power plant.
Yeah. Where's that? My favorite guy.
I'm not sure why that's not popping up on screen.
I think he blanked it out.
It should still, when we get out of the PowerPoint, it's like going right bad thing. You have to embed the video or save it till your second session. So I
My name is Ashley Schluck. I am the Wyoming Traffic Safety Resource Prosecutor. I'm going to be introducing Ben Court. So after a pretty heavy morning, we'll have all things marijuana. Ben has been in Colorado, and he went through the thick of the Colorado legislation and the Colorado experiment that is legalized marijuana. So I will let Ben go ahead and give you a little bit more information about himself because he tells the story better than I do. So please welcome Ben Court.
And I'm totally two-fisting it. I know this is a bunch of people who usually look down on that practice, but there's no way that we're getting through this if it doesn't happen. Thank you guys for coming, and I guess buckle up. Like I'm talking for 3 hours. I got an email from Ashley last week, and she was going over everything. I gave a couple of talks yesterday, and she said, then you've got your 3.5-hour presentation. I said, well, I got a what? And I told my wife, I said, I'm gonna have to stand up for 3 hours. So I wore comfy shoes, and I'm like totally ready to do a deep dive. The all-day trainings that I like to do for this, kind of like a minimum 3 hours. Usually I do a 6 or a 7. So we're going to fall right in the middle of that. But I'm going to give you guys more information than I'm usually able to give in the normal 90 minutes that I get. And hopefully you can stay awake during it. If you got to walk out and stretch or do whatever, I'm not offended at all. If you're crushing candy the whole time, I'm not offended at all. I will tell you when you have to pay attention, because there's a couple. Whoa. Okay. So, by way of introductions, I've spent a lot of time in Wyoming recently giving talks on marijuana all over the community. And I know that I have done a lot of education for law enforcement here as well. And you guys have all been gracious enough to come. And I know it's not just to get your post credits. But has anybody in the last year or so been in a talk that I've given on this subject? What the hell am I going to talk about? If I forget something, please feel free to interrupt me then. Well, I guess it's effective, Rhea. Where'd Rhea go? I guess this statewide tour has been effective. Well, let me give you a little bit of background. And for those of you who have seen things recently, kind of hang tight because there's more and expanded in here. I'm going to take a kind of deep dive into concentrates, which is something that we don't do a whole lot. And I think that'll be fun. So I like to start off with my most controversial affiliation. Some of you guys know these folks. A lot of people think that they know them, but I'm a member of the board of directors for Project SAM. SAM is Smart Approaches to Marijuana, and Smart Approaches to Marijuana started right after the election in Colorado. And I got a phone call from my buddy Kevin, and it was him and three other guys, like super crazy group of people who started. Patrick Kennedy and David Frum, who's the guy who came up with the axis of evil phrase, and Kevin Sabet, and so like super left and super right and super in the middle. And what they wanted to do was form a group of people who were going to have science drive public policy discussions around drugs. And I thought that that was an awesome idea, and we learned pretty quickly that Washington cares very little about science unless science is writing some big campaign contribution check. But the thing that was interesting to me was these pillars that they really wanted to focus on, and I was totally behind them. And since SAM has become a little bit more of a political organization recently, this is still the stuff that I care about. So I like to share it and talk about the why, because it can be a little bit complicated. And it's sure to frustrate pundits on either side. So hopefully get ready for that. I usually find that if I have done my job and if someone came in with real set preconceived ideas, you walk away maybe scratching your head and maybe even a little bit frustrated. So I'm going to try and present the truth for a lot of this, which is kind of middle sometimes. So I want to inform public policy with the science of today's marijuana, which unfortunately is not happening very often. This is a conversation that is being had about a substance that is different than that which people are consuming. And the problem in doing that is not only do we present ourselves as irrelevant when we're having this conversation, but we aren't really prepared to talk about the things that matter with them. So one, we're totally missing the mark, and two, we're talking about something completely different. And as pertains to driving, I think that there's a lot of big takeaways. I've actually got a slide deck from a friend I'm going to share with you after the break about driving, which should be kind of fun. Have honest conversations about reducing the unintended consequences of current marijuana policies. There are across this country plenty of policies that need to be updated. And, you know, we don't do things at a national level. We kind of piecemeal it together. And the example that I like to give on this one is a year or two ago, I was asked to do an interview with Fox News. And I was sitting opposite somebody with the Drug Policy Alliance, of course, because if you don't know the DPA, it's a fun organization to look into. They're guys who wrote all the laws that we vote on about weed. And when we got on and we started talking, it turned out that what I was doing was being asked to defend what the prosecutors had to do in Texas for this particular case. There was a young man who got caught with some brownies. And it was actually just weed in the brownies. It wasn't even concentrates. And I know this is a big issue you guys are struggling with in Wyoming, trying to figure out how to weigh that and what everything looks like. And the kid was looking at a mandatory minimum of 10 years. He was 19 because of the overall volume of the brownies he had, even though like 90% of it was flour and sugar and stuff like that. And I thought that was silly. And I told him that I thought that it was silly. And then that was the day that I got banned from Fox News. It's actually a funny clip if you ever want to look at it, because the lady said, well, if you guys agree, then what's the issue? I said, well, the issue is you. The issue is sensationalized journalism, and the issue is people who want to say an absolute yes and an absolute no and not ask real questions, and it's pitting two people against each other instead of trying to look for answers. My wife was proud that I got banned that day. But there's some complicated things inside of this, and some of our laws need to be updated. This is the big one, to prevent the establishment of big marijuana. So we actually probably need to reform this. I should talk with them, and it's not to prevent anymore, it would be to keep accountable, because it's here. And if you're, just to give you an idea, last week when I was driving through all of Wyoming, it was on the eastern part of the state, somewhere between Sundance and, where did I go from Sundance? And Torrington. I heard an NPR report about how milk was making a comeback in this country, and how we had, yeah, right, like, well, I don't know anywhere. We had sold $7 billion worth of milk the year prior, and the milk manufacturers were all proud. Like, depending on how you look at sales numbers in the states that have legalized marijuana, we sold between 14 and $17 billion worth of weed last year. So, like, big businesses here. So this country's buying more dope than we are milk. I don't know if that's a scientific statement, but that's just something that I can kind of put together after hearing that report. That gives you an idea of how significantly large this industry is. And for so many people, it's a conversation about somebody consuming, somebody growing in a backyard, somebody who's got a plant or two at home, when in reality, this needs to be a conversation about the big business. Because the big business is doing what they have always done. The big business is marketing to problem users, the big business is marketing to the economically depressed, and the big business doesn't give a rat's ass about anything except for the bottom line. You are recording, I can't, sorry, Channel 5. Ooh. Promote research into marijuana's medicinal properties. So, ready for this one? There's some really interesting medicinal properties inside of weed, like for real. And I'm going to cover some of them at the end because I have an opportunity to. But you have things like the most promising and the most interesting that we have seen are like pretty considerable help for people with MS and spasticity that can be associated with that. We have seen real indications for chronic wasting disease associated with AIDS, HIV. And there's a couple more, appetite stimulation for cancer treatment. There's some really interesting medicinal qualities inside of this plant. Now, with that said, and for those of you getting ready to turn and walk out of here, you don't smoke medicine, ever, period. Medicine is not combusted and inhaled, like ever. So the problem with this conversation, and where I think it's been set back and where we've actually moved away from some of the real research into what you see at the bottom is, dang it, pharmacy attainable medications. Where this conversation has been set back is you got a bunch of 20-year-olds saying, my back, and that's not actually allowing for the appropriate research into some of the very sick people who need this help. We've all seen Sanjay Gupta's Ode to Weed, and one of the things that he talks about and hits on there is this absolutely tragic seizure disorder, Dravet syndrome. If this could help these young people suffering, oh, dear God, let's do this. But the idea of having something produced in a garage that we don't know how much pesticides in it, we don't know how much THC's in it, we don't know how much CBD's in it, and then giving it to a kid with a seizure disorder, it's just crazy. Where I think this conversation has been set back is we have stopped caring about how you actually get to the medicine part, and we started allowing medicine by popular vote. There's a lot of things that'll make you feel better for a minute. Not all of them are good for you. Other disclosures that are interesting. I got 3 kids growing up in the weed capital of the world, and it is too. I was in Northern California for a cannabis summit a couple weeks ago, and everybody was there, growers and cultivators and law enforcement. It was a weird room. And when I said that I came from the weed capital of the world, I got a couple of like, boo, whatever. And as I started to go over potency numbers, and I was like, oh yeah, our weed is totally better than yours. One lady in the back said, give us a minute. And I think she's probably right. Like California probably will catch up, but for right now, I come from Weedville, man, and I got kids growing up in Weedville, and so I know this absolutely impacts the way that I look at this. So an example here that I think is relevant, and just to show you how much this has permeated everything that we do back home, somebody asked me the other day what the biggest thing, Matt, I think it was with you up there, the biggest thing that I noticed and remembered, the takeaway from Colorado, I said it's the smell. Just everything smells like weed. And other than that, it's the conversations I got to have with the young people. So my 11-year-old came home from school 3 weeks ago, and a little girl who he's buddies with was talking to him and kind of confiding in him because they all, of course, know what I do. she said that she was worried about her mom and her little sister because her mom wasn't able to stop smoking weed while she was pregnant. And she knew that was probably not a good thing because her mom kept trying to quit, but she was definitely concerned because mom was smoking around the newborn. And she knew that you shouldn't smoke around the newborn. So my son comes home and he's like, what do I say? And I'm like, yeah, it's a great question. Let's figure out how to handle this. It's that level of saturation that my kids' buddies are talking to each other about concerns they have for parents consuming around infants. That influences where I sit, I know. My own recovery influences where I sit. I got sober on June 15th in 1996, and I had left Colorado when I was 12, and I ended up out in Washington, D.C., and that's where I finally got sober. And as such, I work with a lot of people in early recovery. You know, we got a secret society or two that we don't talk about, but central to that is working with young people who are coming in, people who are at the beginning of that. And because of the saturation in my community and it has changed those conversations. I got a lot of these young guys who are like, I totally want to get sober, I don't have to quit smoking weed, right? And that's one of my favorites, especially in rehabs. I remember having a conversation with a young man in rehab about 2 years ago, and he said, I'll stop all this other stuff, but I'm not going to quit smoking weed because I don't have a problem with it. And I was like, so you know you're in rehab, right? And he was like, yeah, but I don't have a problem with weed. I was like, then quit smoking it. No, I don't want to. Oh, you have a problem with weed. Like by the definition of problem, like you're sitting in rehab telling me you're not going to quit, you got an issue with it. And I usually do not have time to do this, but I want to tell you guys that there's no way, from my own recovery standpoint, there's no way that I am standing here, that I am a member of society, a husband, a dad, or whatever else I am, if it wasn't for the interventions that law enforcement offered when I was out there using. Because sometimes you guys kick my ass and sometimes you patted me on the back, but in the end, if I didn't have those interventions, I wouldn't be standing here today. And I think there gets to be this us versus them mentality. So one, recovery's possible. Like you guys have the worst sample group bias in the world. You only see us if we reoffend, but some of us make it out. And two, so that leads me to say thank you very much for the work that you do. And most of us don't have to put on bulletproof vests when we go to work. So my sincere thanks to those of you in law enforcement here today. True first responders. Other affiliations I've got, I'm a fellow at the University of Florida's Drug Policy Institute. I am an educator for the National Marijuana Initiative, which is a project of ONDCP. And I am a board of directors. You ready for this mouthful? And you're ready to ask yourself all sorts of questions in a second, because I usually don't have time to talk about it. I'm on the board of directors for the National Association of Lesbian, Gay, Transgender, Bisexual Treatment Providers and their allies. Where do I fit on that spectrum? Get with me afterwards, I'll tell you. Let's get into it for a minute. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to cover the science for a minute, and then we are going to get into the we're going to do something that's next to impossible to do. We're going to get into the changing scope of what marijuana is. And it's so hard for people to grasp. And then we're going to go deep into concentrates and then talk a little bit more about the biggest issue, which I think is psychosis. These slides, are they going to be available, Ashley? Where'd Ashley go? Get me more. Are the slides going to be available for people to grab?
Yes.
pmoyo.org. And you can... Aw, thanks. You're welcome to take pictures, do anything in the world you want with this, because I'm going to give you a lot. So, one of the first questions that I always get asked from people is, where do I start researching this thing? And there is this misconception out there that because it's been a Schedule I and because of how research is taking place in the world, we don't actually have a lot of information about weed. We have so much sound, valid scientific information about weed. The thing is making sure that it's sound and that it's valid. So what I'm going to do is give you a couple of places to start and look, but before I do that, you got to know that there's nothing at all subjective about scientific findings. This is something that I hear too. Well, Ben, we're not too sure if, or I hear we don't really know about. There's a great article in the Denver Post a year and a half ago that said the jury is still out, is breastfeeding while using THC negative for the baby. So I emailed it to Dr. Paula Riggs, who's a top researcher on the subject in the country. I said, is the jury still out, Paula? And she said, no, here's like 30 articles about the jury not being out. So when we're talking about not subjective, I'm talking about peer-reviewed and journal-published studies. That's the difference between somebody's opinion and a nice paper somebody put together and actual science. Is it peer-reviewed and is it journal-published? Everything I share with you today is going to be peer-reviewed and journal-published. I was given a talk at the college in Casper. The former director of the Wyoming chapter of Normal started to cite a ton of studies to me at the end of it, and those were not journal-published and peer-reviewed studies. If I am more than happy to have conversations that I sit on the opposite side of somebody with if we're talking about real science. There's real science out there. We just got to make sure that we get it. Those don't happen overnight. And you want to know why that happens with weed? Like, I think this is changing, and I'm not sure it's always going to be like this, but the reason why that happens with weed is weed takes a minute. So weed isn't something that we see terrible adverse effects associated with a couple of weeks in. Here's an example that I like to give. If I were to leave Laramie today and I left everybody in this room with a year's supply worth of meth, and I came back next year, and like you had to use it, you could, this place would be a freaking train wreck. Like, there would be cars up on blocks in the parking lot. There would be prosecutors turning tricks in the parking lot. Like, lawyer joke. Again, sorry, Channel 5. That happens quick. It's a fast burn. The trick with weed, if I left all of you guys with a year's supply of weed and I came back next year and I checked in, you know what we would have? We would have workplace performance in some of you. We would have academic issues. Those of you who are under 26, we would probably see some fairly profound results with because of the way I'll talk about brain chemistry in a minute. But for the most part, we would just see half of you would have moved back home and gotten really good at Call of Duty. That's a video game. That's a video game if you're not. It doesn't do the same thing as quickly as other drugs do. So the need for longitudinal studies cannot be overstated. Good science doesn't happen overnight. I broke it. So as you start to see some of the gaps in knowledge that we have, and you realize that that's because it's good. That's what she said. Thank you. You're welcome. Sarah Alfer. We will have the knowledge, but we don't have the knowledge about a lot of this right now. So here's where I would encourage you to start. 2014, Wayne Hall, Adverse Health Effects of Recreational Cannabis Use. One of the reasons why we like this one so much is it's got just about everything in it. So if you have a question about how weed is interacting with the brain and body, that's a really nice place to start, just because they cover just about everything in there. It's a large study. The other one, the next one, so Dr. Volkow is the head of NIDA, the National Institute for Drug Abuse. She's the nation's top addiction doc, and just an absolutely brilliant person to boot. And she published a meta-study in 2014 in the New England Journal of Medicine. So the meta-study, of course, being a summary of all of the sound science that's out there, peer-reviewed, again, and then journal published to say, here are the overall findings from all the things that look and feel like this. So you got the nation's top doc publishing a summary of all of the sound science in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a good one. That's also a really nice place to begin. The Colorado Health Institute's legal marijuana coming into focus is really relevant because, in some ways, it's incredibly irrelevant because they have this thing at the beginning where they say, because we did such a crappy job of collecting data prior to implementation, we're never going to have the whole story. That's my favorite disclaimer on all of these. Like, everything that's going to follow is never really going to be too awesome because we didn't collect any baseline data. Colorado built no repository to store that information. We built no mechanism to track that information. There's a lot of different things that you got to track. People ask you a relatively simple question like, what are DUID rates in Colorado and how have they changed with marijuana legalization? What's the lethality that's been associated with it on the roadways? And that'd be awesome. We could go to NHTSA if we actually tracked this, if we tested more than 48% of all of the fatalities in Colorado for substances. So they said, we got to start coming up with some data. And that's some good data, particularly the demographic information. And this is one, I'll just throw it in there just because we have time. This is one where I found something. I wrote a whole chapter about this in my book because it pissed me off so much. We hear the social justice side of this, like, let's actually stop the war on drugs and let's stop locking up people of color. And what that taught us, Colorado Health Institute's legal marijuana coming into focus, was that since commercialization in Colorado, there's a wonderful report in the Denver Post that says most dispensaries located in poor minority neighborhoods. It's the exact title of it. Since we instituted commercial marijuana in Colorado, we've had a decrease. So this is only under 21. Okay, because you can't arrest the other people. We've had an overall decrease in the arrest of under 21 white kids by 8%. So we were arresting fewer white kids in Colorado for weed. We had an increase of 18% of the arrest of Hispanic kids for anything weed related, and a 58.5% increase of African American kids in Colorado since commercialization. So bang up job on social justice there, Colorado. But I'm going to cite that, and it's a nice place to go. The Lancet Journal, February 2015, Volume 2, blah, 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 is called The Effects of High-Potency Cannabis on Psychosis. Who's familiar? This is probably the most relevant scientific finding in the last 15 years on this subject. I cannot overstate the significance of this. And so I've got a couple slides about it at in the second section. So hang tight for that one. And then see the asterisks here, because it's not journal published and peer reviewed, it's not science, it's data. So a lot of you guys know HIDA, especially law enforcement, because Wyoming falls under the Rocky Mountain HIDA, which is based in Denver. That's the high-intensity drug trafficking area, for those of you not familiar. And what HIDA has done is manually gathered the information that the state didn't gather from day one. So HIDA calls every coroner, every toxicologist, every sheriff, every chief, every hospital, and they manually gather the information so that we can tell the story about what's happening. It's a huge undertaking. You guys should have them talk at this sometime. Kevin Wong should come up or something. But Tom Gorman and Kevin Wong, and they give us all the real data that we've got. And actually quite a bit of the traffic information that I'm going to share with you has come from them. And then I got a full list of references in the last two slides. Okay, done with the boring stuff. I could not say it better than this ad says it. So I don't try. I just let them speak for themselves. This is the new school cannabis. It's not what you smoked in the 70s. I have this conversation with like literally, correct use of the word, tens of thousands of people every year all over the country. And the biggest issue that I find is that everybody's talking about weed from days past. Talking about like the time that you went through the entire Lord of the Rings series in a weekend and you were just puffing, or the time you saw Joe Walsh and you were just puffing, or the order of the pizza, and if you hit play at the same time on Dark Side of the Moon and Wizard of Oz, you gave yourself away. It's cool. You're a good company. That's what we're talking about. And the sooner we get it through our brains that is not what we are talking about, the better. This is not that weed. So I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes demonstrating that to you, because this is a huge statement. All right, here's a huge statement. Unless you have purchased and consumed a THC product in the last 3 years that you bought commercially, your model of this is antiquated. It's like mine is. We're talking about something that's different than what people are using. We're talking about a hand crank Model T, and they're talking about a Ferrari. Your model of what this is, your construct, is critically flawed, unless you've purchased and consumed in the last 3 years. It's not what you smoked in the 70s, because it's not about weed anymore. It's about THC. So for those of you who are not familiar, THC is the part of the plant that gets you high. The more THC, sort of, we're going to break this down in a minute, the more THC, the higher you get. And I absolutely love the honesty of this dispensary, because they're not playing to the public. They're not like Dr. Whoever's Feel Good or like Nature's Healing. They're like, listen, man, we sell THC. Like, period. Come in for THC. THC gets you high. Come on in. You remember that movie, Thank You for Smoking? There's a scene in it where the guy says, he's talking to a cigarette company executive, and he says, oh, we don't sell cigarettes. We sell nicotine delivery systems. That's what we do in Colorado. We're not selling weed. We're selling THC. And we are getting THC into the user's body by any means necessary. Wait till the edible section. I'm going to talk about suppositories fully. And there's photos. There's totally not photos. The sooner we realize that this is what the conversation's about, the sooner we can start having relevant conversations with the people we interact with. If that's law enforcement, the people you're talking to through a window, if that's prosecutors, people you're trying to interact with, parents, educators, whatever. Because this is one of those wake up and stop crushing candy parts. Like, if you walk away with nothing else from these next few things, it's this. And the next slide. This is an amazing data set. And this has taught us so much. And I'm going to go over 3 of the big things. So first, if you can't read, those of you in the back, we're looking at 51 years from 1960 to 2011, when the federal government unilaterally pulled the funding for this program and then issued a memo telling them that they weren't allowed to test anything that's ever purchased from a commercial dispensary, because then, of course, they'd be complicit in violating federal law. We're actually this guy and I are trying to find private funding to continue this. These are increments of 2 over 50 years. This is THC. This is CBD. Remember back at the beginning when I was talking about the medicinal components of this? That's the CBD. There's 200 and some chemicals inside of this plant pre-combustion, 500 and some post-combustion. What matters are 2 of them, THC and CBD. THC because it gets you high, CBD because it's where the medicine is. A little oversimplified, but it'll stand, right? Do I get a pat? Yeah. Sarah, one of the most brilliant toxicologists and chemists in the country up front, make me a little nervous. Okay. So what we see over 50 years is incredibly telling, but let's not get to what we see at first. Let's get back to where we start, 1960. All right, so everybody's always talking about Woodstock weed. That was 69, that was around here. What you see at the beginning of this thing is absolutely fascinating, because we can see the closest recordings that we have to marijuana, cannabis sativa in its natural form, which holds somewhere, you ready for this? Somewhere between 0.2 and 0.5% THC is what occurs naturally in weed. 0.2 to 0.5%. So I have lots of conversations on this subject, and I've had a chance to sit opposite the last 2 executive directors of NORML on radio things or TV things or something. And when they start talking about the miracle plant aspect, I'm like, totally, for sure, fully. Genesis 1:12. Thank you, Rhea. I've given you all the seed-bearing plants and herbs to use. I get it. Trust me, I quoted that to my dad a lot of times because he was a preacher. Like, I understand that. I also understand that this was one of 50 essential herbs inside of traditional Chinese medicine. That Thomas Jefferson more than likely grew this thing. That there's real evidence of our forefathers actually drying and combusting and not just using it for rope, which the conservative side of this likes to say. No, weed has been around forever, and we've been interacting with it for millennium, mankind. But you know what we've been interacting with? You know what's natural? What we've been interacting with is between 0.2 and 0.5% THC. Now here's where that story gets cool, and this is where I will totally agree to the miracle plant thing with the proponents of it, because what also occurs naturally is a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC. Now, I am going to get a little bit 201 here, but not too much, especially because Sarah's here. If you think about the potency of weed as being just THC, you're missing the mark a little bit. It's not. It's actually the delta between the two. It's the difference between the amount of CBD and the THC. You can almost refer to that as like the level of intoxicating. If you have so let's way oversimplify this. If you have a 10% THC that's got 5% CBD, you have an effective intoxication level of 5 or so percent. That's garbage science and would never, but it gives you the idea. It's not about how much THC, it's about how much difference between THC and CBD there is. Because this is one of the wonderful gifts that God gave us with the plant that grows naturally. CBD not only neutralizes the psychoactive components inside of THC, it keeps bad things from happening in the brain. So if you're at a 1-to-1 ratio, you're going to feel weird from smoke inhalation before you would from the psychoactive components of THC. You are not going to have instances of psychosis, either acute or chronic. You are not going to have the same issues that we are seeing today at a 1-to-1 ratio, because think of it this way. Think of CBD as like nature's way of keeping THC in check. Yeah? Cool? All right, this is the part you had to wake up for. These are increments of 2. This is a 51-year set. This is an example of good gardening. This is an example of a country that likes to get high. 5% of the world's population, we consume 2/3 of the world's illicit drugs. We love to get high around here. This is what happens when we figure out that by selectively breeding something, we can get higher. So these are seed exchanges, these kind of cross-germinating different strains of things. And then we get into when we start to see it really rise, this is when we start to understand what cloning looks like, an asexual plant that doesn't reproduce, it just buds. This is hydroponic growth. This is inverted hydroponic growth. This is good, solid gardening. 50 years, increments of 2. This is good, solid science. That's 6 years in increments of 5. The reason why I'm running all over the place and telling everybody that we're talking about a whole different drug than what you think we're talking about is because the majority of the data that we still have to cite, especially around addiction rates, is from 2002. Where the national average was still around 6%. Where I came from in Washington, D.C., where the weed came straight in through Anacostia and we sold it off the wharf, and it was maybe 10 or 12%. I mean, we had some really serious weed back there. You were above the national average, and you probably had places like the top part of Wyoming that was below the national average, but we were around 6%. This is where we're still getting most of our information around here. What makes this so crucial and so important, and what I'm going to get into in a few minutes, remember that Lancet study that I mentioned at the beginning? The reason why that study is so important, other than the findings, were that it's the highest level of THC that we have ever studied and returned results. That's at a 5-year check-in. They got results back from this. What we found in that study is kind of concerning, and I'll share it with you. But again, it's interesting because we've never studied a higher potency of THC. It was 16% was the high end in that study. So we are talking about a different substance. And if we go back to but Bill Clinton, but George Bush, it wasn't just weed. We all know what was up with him. And Barack Obama, and if we go back and we're always citing that stuff, we are talking about a different substance. Even those of you in this room who had experience with, like I did years ago, you're talking about a different substance. Your dad, your grandfather, your uncle, your whatever, don't matter. Steve Jobs, that none of that stuff matters because this didn't really matter. There's a lot of people in my field who take issue with that, and they say, I don't care. From where I stand, from an addiction treatment standpoint, from looking at the psychosis that's associated with, next to nothing. You had the genetic predisposition, and that was about it. That wasn't a big deal. I wasn't doing what this is doing. This, on the other hand, very big deal. So somebody asked me about the last one, and they said, how did we get there? And so I explained gardening, and I said, that's good gardening. And then they said, well, how did we get here? And I said, that's just good science. This is a dispensary, a conglomerate of dispensaries in Colorado. You see, this is actually their slogan, good chemistry. They ain't even making no bones about it. And I love the helix on these guys who are called cross genetics. It's the name of a dispensary. For the love of God, stop thinking that this is grandma in the Northern California growing something out back for 3 months out of the year. It is not. It's dudes who work at companies called things like Cross Genetics and Good Chemistry, and who employ more PhD level chemists than they do growers, because that's how they're going to make their money. There's a citation showing you that commercialization actually increases potency. All right, here's the next part that you got to actually catch, and this takes a minute to unpack, and I'm so grateful I have a minute on it. We're not going to... Addiction is so misunderstood in this country. And one of the reasons why is everybody thinks that it's some sort of arbitrary assignment. We think that, like, you have watched every single Cheech and Chong movie, you've got it. You actually drive a lowrider, you've got it. Did you see that he's wearing a Grateful Dead shirt? You listen to Snoop and Wiz. We take a snapshot of somebody's iPod and we're like, addict. Gosh, if people could hear the playlist I listen to, I probably wouldn't pass that test. It's not assigning an arbitrary diagnosis. It's about objective. Addiction is defined by meeting objective diagnostic criteria. This is a question I get asked the most. Ben, do you really believe that marijuana is addictive? Do I really believe that Wyoming is directly north of Colorado? I'm not giving you my belief system. I'm not sharing with you something that I really feel in my heart. I'm sharing objective diagnostic criteria. Here's the way those objective diagnostic criteria work. There are 11 criteria. If a person or 3 of those criteria, they have substance use disorder. That's the real word for addiction. Substance use disorder that's... no, that's wrong. Up to 6, up to 5. If they meet between... I just gave this talk yesterday about 5 is moderate, 6 and above is severe. Just tell me when I say dumb stuff. That's how we come up with these rates. That's how we come up with being able to assign addiction rates to particular substances. A one-time exposure leads to an overall addiction rate of fill in the blank. So back from 2002, these data are 2002, these are 2015. You see 9% of anyone who ever interacts with diagnosable addiction to it. You know what doesn't matter at all? That doesn't matter at all, because that's about the portion of the population that's genetically predisposed to begin with. If you put all of us in this room on a desert island, there would be about 10% of us who are genetically predisposed who are going to find a way to spike our hits. I like you. We got to be friends. Ourselves in the head, we would do something to spike me. That doesn't matter. Where this starts to get a little bit is when you look at young, so that's under 18. We get addiction rates of about 17%. Still not that big of a deal, especially when you consider alcohol being low 20. Not that big of a deal. Really, but it goes to show you the incredible importance. Sure, it's frontal lobe development. That's all it comes down to with most substances that alter brain chemistry. It's from the executive thought portion of our brain until we are in our mid-20s. Cents on every dollar for what I do. Like, there you go. I ain't saying it's right. It's right. I'm just saying it's how the world works. Women get there faster. Men, mid-20s. If we waited till our frontal lobes were fully developed, we wouldn't have issues like this. This is prefrontal lobe development. This is the story. 25 to 50% addiction rates. Let's contextualize this a little bit because data heads in the audience are like 100% variation. Rah, rah, rah. How can that be? All right, I'll tell you exactly how that can be a thing. There's 3 contributing factors. This is the second part. If you get nothing else, get this part. Nothing else. I seriously need a t-shirt that says this. Age of onset, frequency of use, and potency. That's how you go from here to here. Age of onset. To give you is gigantic. This is the most addictive substance, illicit or harmful substance that we track, that we care about is nicotine. The addiction rate's about 54%, 53, 54%. Depending on how many times the heroin's been stepped on, depending on how the meth is and how much versus Drano there is in it, you have addiction rates with things like meth and heroin that are upper 30s to lower 40s. That should get like that should have been the oh dear God moment. I'm talking about a substance. It doesn't have the same ramifications a lot of the time unless you drive, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But I'm talking about a substance with higher addiction rates than we say meth and heroin. Everyone's like, oh God, meth and heroin. That's crazy talk. Now, if somebody gave me a commercial during the Super Bowl and I got to tell the world one thing, I would try and figure out how to say this next part concisely. The DSM is the manual, first published in 1960, the updated version of a year and a half ago, that spells out the objective criteria for all the mental health diagnoses that are out there. So everything from depressive disorder to bipolar to whatever in the world you want, it's all in there. That's where the objective criteria are. The DSM-5, for the first time ever, again, it's been published since 1960, for the first time ever, included cannabis withdrawal and its objective diagnostic criteria. You know how crazy that is? So a gentleman asked me last night, he said, is this psychological or is this physical? I'm talking about physical dependence on cannabis. I was at ASAM, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, a month ago down in New Orleans. These are the top thinking addiction docs in the country, some of them in the world. And we were talking about weed, and this was a big topic of conversation. If I would have gone in there even 5 years ago and said, hey, I think in the next version of the DSM, there's going to be cannabis withdrawal syndrome, they would have laughed me out of that place. They would have thrown stuff at me. Because the idea of that, even for people on the forefront, was far-fetched enough. Physical dependence to weed? You got to be kidding me, man. Not kidding. It's a diagnostic code that was, I think, so there's a specific ICD-9 code that's associated with it, and I think it was either 12 or 18,000 times last year in Colorado. We know that we gave it out. Listen, this is not because they were missing the mark. This is not because we weren't catching it before. It's because it wasn't a thing. So I just left a large hospital system that'll remain nameless, but I'll tell you right now, if you don't know this already, hospitals want every nickel you have. And if we can get you to mortgage your children's future, we want that as well. That's how they work. If they could bill you every time a doctor walked by the room and glanced in, they would. If they could bill you every time the nurses talked about you in the break room, they would. Hospitals going to bill you for everything they possibly can't charge you $30 for damn Motrin, for crying out loud. If the most commonly used illicit substance in the world would have had a physical dependence associated with it, you had better believe hospitals would have been charging you for it. But it didn't. So this is one of these big change the way you are thinking about this, man. Because I'm not talking about the drug that most people are talking about. When people say it's impossible, you can't become physically dependent on cannabis. Yeah, well, it was incredibly rare before. But I'm not talking about that drug. And we got to have that. We got to shift that. We're not talking about that. So there's this old rule inside of alcohol sales that we have known for absolutely ever, and it holds true every time we see the data, that about 80% of the product is consumed by about 20% of the consumers. It's an 80-20 rule. You know who the booze industry doesn't care even a little bit about? They don't care about my wife, who has 2 margaritas a year and half a glass of champagne on New Year's. Trust me, I try to talk her into more, you know what I'm saying, but it doesn't always work. Damn it. Sorry, Channel 5. They don't care about her because she ain't making them no money. You know who they care about? The dude who was drinking Mad Dog 2020 at 12 years old. I'm at her. Because I'm going to be that solid long-term customer. In Colorado, we actually have learned it's even a little bit more intense, that about 84% of the product is consumed by about 20% of the consumers. So, what does that teach us? That chronic user is money. That's where it's at, man. And if we forget for a second that this is about money, buy my book. You see the little play on the money thing? How do we get to that chronic user? What are our 3 factors? Anybody? First one. Come on, Rhea. Frequency of use, potency. Age of onset, frequency of use, and potency. Accessibility? Yes, but that's a predictor, but not in this particular one. Accessibility is a huge predictor for youth use. Age of onset. As Cookie Monster on the side of a dispensary with a plate full of weed. Yeah, thanks for not laughing. It can be kind of funny if it's not where you're raising your kids. That's for real. That's actually Cookie Monster. He's got these googly eyes. They got a cease and desist from Sesame Street. I saw it. Listen, I'm trying to stay pretty neutral on this thing. And former drug addict, I don't get to throw stones. I got to be cool. But listen, man, if you're selling weed and you get a cease and desist from Sesame Street, you need to ask yourself some hard questions. You seriously need to go home and be like, am I really an asshole or not? I don't know. Age of onset. Joe Camel, Spuds McKenzie, nothing. You know what they would have? They weren't hijacking Sesame Street characters to sell cigarettes and booze. This is a kids-only fishing program right near my house. Have I told you this story yet, Sarah? There's a kids-only fishing program right next to my house. So here's all the signs that you can fishing for 15 years and younger, and it's only dedicated to young people. So I kind of live there during the summer. And when I went with my 8-year-old 2 months ago to go and scout it out for the year, which meant we were going to chase geese and stuff, as soon as I got out of my car, I smelled it. And I'll show you the picture, and here. Because sometime over the winter, these guys had opened up directly across the street of the kids-only fishing program. So let me point a couple things out to you. This is on Sunset Ave in Longmont. Do you see what's around here? Nothing. I'm taking this picture from the parking lot with no zoom or anything of the dispensary from the kids-only fishing program. And here, this is awesome. This is the sign, the Native Roots sign. These guys own a ton of dispensaries all over. This is the road. This is the bike path through my community. The sign is not facing the road. The sign is facing the bike path. And when the city of Longmont tells me that there's no dispensaries in town because there's a moratorium, and I get frustrated, they send me over to Boulder and then Boulder County, and then when I end up with the city planner in Boulder who finds the answer, I find out how they were able to do this, because it violates 2 setback issues. It's a park, and it's a kid-specific program, 1,000 feet. And I was like, well, we can't have that, until the city planner explained to me that this yellow line is the boundary between unincorporated Boulder County in the city of Longmont. So the city of Longmont's like, and the unincorporated Boulder County is like, that place isn't in our jurisdiction. We just got the dispensary. You think that just happened? You think those guys are just lucky? Shit. That's Santa Claus with a bag full of weed offering you 10% off when you bring in friends and family. I ask you, esteemed colleagues, is this for grown-ups? Age of onset, frequency of use. It's an advertising campaign by a company called Sweet Leaf. Says smoke weed every day. Look, I don't care who you are. So seriously, the first line in my book, which pisses a lot of people off, and sorry, Rhea, for even trying, but I really don't care. I don't care about casual adult use. I don't want to have that conversation. I'm not interested in having that conversation. I don't know a lot of people who are. Like, if you're the fully developed frontal lobe and you're over 30 and you want to, like, don't drive and don't let kids see you. Don't do it too much. That's my advice. I don't give a crap. I'm here talking about business, and I'm talking about kids, and I'm talking about ramifications on our roads. Whoever you are and however moderate I'm going to be, you should not smoke weed every day. So you are talking about actual physical changes to brain structure. You get that? The physical organ of your brain will change if you consume this much. We are talking about a loss of gray matter, a loss of white matter, connective tissues. In a really terrifying study out of NIH last month in rats, you actually are seeing some radical changes in frontal lobe development, shrinkage and black spots developing. Don't smoke weed every day. Unless, of course, you're trying to get a chronic user who's going to keep them doors open. This was a cool one. You could win a pound with this dispensary. And the way that they pay it out is you get an ounce a day until you get your pound. I don't know anybody. I know a lot of for real users. Remember rehab? I don't know anybody who could put down a Zia today's weed every day. Nobody. There's a back to school special. Like, for real. That's a move-in special at CU Boulder last fall. You get 20% off with a student ID. Fred Flintstone, when I say dabs and concentrates, who's hip to the game here? The rest of you, we're going to have a fun afternoon. That's Fred Flintstone smoking a dab. That's a form of weed between 2 half-naked chicks. That came in the value pack to my house. You know the thing with like blackjack pizza and like garage door openers and stuff? In Colorado, we get things that give us 20% off our initial purchase. There's a $1 joint when I show my ski pass. I got a buddy who's actually from Wyoming, lives in Wyoming. And a couple of years ago, his wife and daughter were hit by a severely marijuana impaired snowboarder in Colorado. And his wife was in the hospital for a year, and his daughter died. Like, trust me, man, there was enough weed on Colorado mountains pre-people selling you a joint for $1 when you showed your ski pass. You got to come see it now if you haven't. I wouldn't recommend skiing in it, but you got to come see it. Maybe there's microcosm for traffic and all of that. So as I have these conversations with young people today that look much more like harm reduction than they do what I was able to have with them a few years ago, because they have grown up on a steady diet of the media, and oh my goodness, you'd love to hear how some of this stuff actually comes about. Again, we got time. Screw it. And catch this part. Wait for this. You want to piss some people off, get spike ratings. Here it is. Ariana Huffington is the founder and editor of the HuffPost. The Huffington Post is where all the kids get their news. Thank you. She sits on the board of directors for the Drug Policy Alliance. The Drug Policy Alliance is the organization that wrote Amendment 64, 502, Prop 64 in California. They wrote all of them. You go on their website and they say it's a first step to the commercialization of every vice substance, meth and heroin included. And we wonder why these kids give us this message that's like, it's not a big deal, man. It's not a thing. It's completely harmless. You should use it prophylactically to avoid ever getting a cold. Your eyes hurt? Smoke this. You got a hangnail? Smoke this. It's never hurt anybody. It's never killed anybody. It's utterly harmless. The worst part, most dangerous part about weed is what happens if you get caught with it. These young kids give us these messages. You want to see where they all come from? Seriously, go to the DPA's website. And it's on the frequently asked questions. They have grown up on this diet provided to them of people like Ariana Huffington that says weed's not a big deal. So when I'm having these conversations with them and I'm trying to tell them, actually, man, it is kind of a big deal. And you should wait if I'm getting into the harm reduction thing, or that's a grown-up word. They say, yeah, okay, whatever, stupid old guy. The teddy bear riding the Rasta rocket over the Flatirons says that we should stay high, Boulder. That's a really difficult message to counter. We've gone for an hour, right? Concentrates are next. I halfway think, you know what we might do? We might skip concentrates because we got to figure out some video in. We'll do edibles, vaporizing, because then after the break, I'm going to talk about traffic. So, don't look at this. There goes all my dramatic emphasis. Ooh, no, don't see that. We're going to watch videos. It's going to be awesome. When you come back after the break, you can totally fall asleep. Sorry for cussing so much. Let's talk about edibles for a second. 30 minutes on edibles will be perfect. We'll take a break after this, and then we can eat. I don't know why I use this picture. I just like this picture. Check this out down below, and I guess that's applicable here. Did you get caught with pot in Nebraska? Need a 420 lawyer? I'm guessing there's one or two people who are saying instead of NE, it says WY. But you need to understand a couple of things about concentrate or about edibles. What you need to understand is that if it can be introduced to the human body, huge statement here, I've yet to be proven wrong on it. I'm buying the steak to the person who does. If it can be introduced to the human body, it is being commercially produced in Colorado with THC in it. Anything that can go in is being commercially produced with it. So we're going to get to some traffic implications here in a second because they are significant. I love this article from The Cannabist. That's Denver Post's ode to all things weed, by the way. Coffee, post-tattoo ointment, toothpaste, vaginal suppositories. The staggering variety begs the question, what can't we infuse? I think they just wanted to write the word vaginal instead of anal, because anal suppositories are also really popular. It's a very efficient way of getting medicine. For those of you who are not yet familiar with how efficient it is, just wait till you're a little older, because I'm 38 and I already, you can find out. Any way it can be introduced to your body, someone's commercially producing it with THC. I was doing an interview with NPR a year or two ago, and the lady said to me, she's like, well, Ben, it's not like there's weed spaghetti. And so I'm like on my phone and I'm Googling. And I sent her an advertisement for THC-infused pasta sauce and a coupon for THC-infused noodles. And I was like, there's totally weed spaghetti, and it's on sale. If you want to cruise on over and get some, absolutely anything that can be introduced to your body, somebody's commercially producing with THC. And I'll give you some examples, most of them for law enforcement in the room. What else you got to understand is that 10 milligrams of activated Delta-9 is a legal serving. Now, we came up with that 10 milligram limit after very careful consideration, a sound vetting of all of the science, consultation with the best and brightest minds in the country. No, we didn't. We pulled it out of our collective asses in Colorado, and we decided the 10 milligrams made sense. You were on that committee, weren't you, Sarah? Yeah, it's like...
It was a round number.
That's how we came up with it. The docs who I liked... the docs who I work with and we were suggesting 5, because at least we had some idea of how that was interacting. What we know is that 10 milligrams, it can hit you pretty freaking hard. That's a good amount of THC. You guys are close enough. Well, we are close enough right now. I know a lot of you are from all over the place. This is a package of THC-infused gummy bears by a company called Pure. These are 10 milligrams is a legal serving. It's 10 gummy bears inside of this package. Math is simple. Unless you live in Colorado, where 2 + 2 = 64. Each gummy bear has 100 milligrams of THC in it. Each one. There's our rendition of 1/10 of a gummy bear. So, the big issue, takeaway number 2 from this, it can be everything, and you really can't imagine how potent these things are. There's a very famous case a couple of years ago about the student from University of Wyoming who came down to Colorado and consumed an entire cookie instead of the 1/8. And we'll get into how it happened, not that particular case, but how it happens, because it takes a minute for this to hit. But we'll talk about that in a second. Here's the March Madness bracket back home. Now you might notice that these look like lemon drops and those little watermelon candies, and those looked a lot like gummy bears. It's because they are. It's because it's what we call, this is the real language that we use in the state. They're repurposed candies. It's a candy that was purchased in bulk at like Sam's Club or Costco, infused with a concentrated THC and repackaged. And we're like, I don't know why the kids got into it. It's your fault, parents. You need to do a better job with your kids. That's seriously the kind of stuff that they say. But this is awesome. This says adults 21 and only, 21 up, and medical use, medicate responsibly. Medicate's one of my favorite verbs in the English language now, by the way. Keep out of reach from children. It says from children. No, it actually does say from. Because heaven forbid you leave a Jolly Rancher on the table. THC-infused products. So the lesson that, and let me show you a bunch, and then I'll give you law enforcement something to kind of take away from with this. There's a caramel with 100 milligrams. There's a hot chocolate with 20 legal servings. Those were in styrofoam cups. There's a candy bar. There's a cookie. This is a perfect way to give this example. So what do they say? Oh, perfect. Okay, so this candy bar has 100 milligrams of THC in it. And there's 10 squares, right? Like a Hershey's bar. What do you think? 10 milligrams per square. Makes perfect sense. You know what the people selling this stuff are not? Professional food preparers. In fact, because there's THC in it, the FDA can have nothing whatsoever to do with the whole thing. The 100 and some years of consumer protection that we have from the FDA is gone, because if the FDA has anything to do with it, they are then complicit in violating federal law. So these guys, there was like for real, like seriously, a case in Colorado where people were mixing batter in an old washing machine. And they got caught, and then they were packaging it and selling it. The FDA couldn't have nothing to do with it. So they're not professional food preparers. So you got 100 milligrams and you got 10 bars, right? So what you think is there's going to be 10 milligrams per section. That was what the young man from Wyoming thought with a cookie. That's right. That's why I put this slide in. Because there were 80 milligrams in the cookie, they cut it into eighths, and he consumed an eighth of it. So here's the problem with that. The THC could be, all of it could have ended up here because it's in the mix as a whole. It's not like somebody's going and squirting it in each little bar. Trust me, they don't give a crap about consumer protections and controls around it. The gummy bear thing, you might eat that ear and get 90 milligrams instead of 10. You can't guess how it's going to play out, but here's the problem with it is if you eat this, okay, so if we want to get messed up, if we want to get high, if we want to get drunk, if we want to we drink or use something, and it happens really quickly, that's how getting intoxicated works. Aside from some hallucinogens and things, usually it's a pretty instant, oh, I feel that. That's why people like heroin a whole lot more than prescriptions at some point, because it's like instead of waiting a few minutes to digest into, you're like, whoa, I feel that. If you're trying to get high, and since most people consuming marijuana are trying to get high, you're typically not expecting to wait for a long time. This can take 40 to 60 minutes for you to feel. So let's say, like the story from the young man from Wyoming, I eat an eighth of the cookie, and then I'm like, and SpongeBob is still not funny. Okay, this sucks. Maybe I should just eat the rest of it. Maybe I didn't get any THC. Maybe there wasn't enough. Maybe I got a tolerance. Boom, you eat the whole cookie. In that particular case that led to an acute psychotic incident where he destroyed the hotel room and jumped out of the window and died. And that's what all of the cases of people coming into, not all of them, the vast majority of people in EDs in Colorado are there for. If you didn't read the piece that Maureen Dowd wrote for the New York Times called Don't Harsh My Mellow, you should. Because same thing, heaven forbid she ate a full half of a cookie and had a really, really intense night, ended up in the ED. That's one of the big problems with edibles. All THC infused. Again, not a Swedish fish looking thing, an actual Swedish fish. Suckers. All lemon drops and all sorts of crap. There's a mint. This is a lemonade and an iced tea with 100 milligrams per bottle. You want to see something crazy tonight? Go put this into YouTube. Keef Cola. Because a bottle of Keef Cola, which is a soda, has 350 milligrams, so 35 legal servings. It's got a little thing at the bottom that says consume 1/35 at a time. But your spoiler alert that the kids drinking Keef Cola on YouTube are not drinking 1/35. It's a candy bar with 350 milligrams, gummy bear with 200. Suckers. That's a granola bar. Granola is actually a really popular infused product. And this one was interesting because I'd never seen anything like this before, sir, and I don't know if there's any research on it or anything, but caffeine and THC in one, is it a good thing? Sometimes marijuana can make you feel a little lethargic. Go so well together. You're chill, relaxed. I don't know. So it's infused both. This is a liquid THC. This is like a 5-hour energy THC. There's a THC breast spray. Remember when you were like 7th grade and you were like, what's up, baby? If the breast spray works out well enough for you, there's a THC infused sex lube. My general advice, way outside of THC, I'm not a medical doctor, but let me just, don't put anything down there that's not FDA approved. Like, this is my advice. One person to another. So let's look at implications for traffic safety, and for those of you who are really concerned with that here. You see signs of impairment. You have observed signs of impairment. You smell nothing, you see nothing, your dog ain't picking up on nothing. There's absolutely no reason that Ashley could not have been handing me THC-infused coffee this entire time. You'd be surprised how she rolls. I'm just kidding. I know you have like a career here or whatever. There is nothing that could keep me from consuming that, like quite literally in front of you. And I'll tell you what, as somebody who used for a long time and who pushed the envelope as hard as I could for a long time, I would get a kick out of that. I would get a kick out of having a conversation with the dude who just pulled me over and thrown in a piece of THC gum and taking a sip of my THC coffee and having my sucker sitting down here, my Tic Tacs, my mints, my breast spray, my cotton candy, my anything, hiding in plain sight. So if you're seeing this, and if there's signs of impairment, if you're concerned about this thing, like look at the situation with different eyes. Because instead of it being like a roach in the glove box, it could be like for real anything. So let's take another scenario. You've got somebody who you're talking with who is increasingly agitated or showing signs of intoxication, and you've been with them for the last 40 minutes. You know they have not taken a drink of coffee or had a sucker or smoked any weed in the meantime. But you're seeing this stuff that's not adding up. Maybe they consumed before they came in, and it's doing this. Again, as a former user, I would love to do that because I'd walk out laughing. One of the things I did, my ninth step was a lot of fun. That's where you tell a bunch of people you're sorry. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. And I used to go very regularly to 12-step meetings because I had a bunch of I had 3 mandated 90 and 90s. I had to do 90 meetings in 90 days and get it all signed and everything. And I decided to have fun with it, and so I started to get high in the parking lot. And then when nobody called me on it, and for the most part I was just blowing coke because you couldn't smell it. But then when nobody called me on it, I started drinking liquor in the parking lot and then going in and picking up chips. Because it proved some stuff to me. It proved to me that everybody in the room was nothing but a liar, and I caught them all being hypocrites. Really what it was they were loving me before I could love me. But I got a kick out of getting high in front of a judge, being high in front of a judge, being high when I was having some big conversation at school. It's fun because I'm proving something to myself. So you're talking to somebody and you're seeing that impairment. Think about maybe an edible before. Do not rule out suppositories. I know it's crazy and it sounds ridiculous, but it's absolutely a thing. Again, it's a very efficient way for people to absorb alcohol as well. If you're not hip to this, you should be. The tampon soaked in alcohol and the anything that can go into your body is being infused with THC in it. So we will end this section and we'll break 10 minutes early, and we can take a minute while I figure out the videos with this advertisement/warning. It's a company called Chiba Chew. So Chiba Chew, this Decadose that they sell, is the exact size of a Jolly Rancher. I know because I bought them. I use my credit card to buy all my weed in Colorado to prove a point, because it's totally illegal, and I've never bought weed with anything other than a credit card. And then I always bring the receipt into whatever jurisdiction I'm in, and the cop who's at the thing says, and what am I supposed to do with this? I'm like, I don't know, Schedule 1 controlled substance, do whatever you want to do, man. This is exactly the size of a Jolly Rancher, only it's like a toffee. This is the Decadose. The Decadose is 170 milligrams of THC in it, 17 legal servings. So this advertisement tells us to choose wisely. Do you want orange, strawberry, vanilla, sour apple? Choose wisely. I like to reframe that and say, choose wisely. Part concentrates. This thing is serious. Put somebody's eye out. I left my clicker on the table. How are we looking in the hallway? We about good out there? All right, 1 minute. Let's start in 1 minute. 3 exact. Thank you, sir. All right, let's talk about concentrates. This is part of the conversation that I usually have to go quickly over, which kills me. And I'm really excited to be getting into it, and really excited for some feedback at the end of this also. But like this is a really big topic to be talking about. In April of 2014, so The Cannabist is the show that the Denver Post has. So first it's a section in the paper, and then it's a show that they do a web broadcast of. And they have a weekly web show, and in April last year, they brought on the CEO of a company called Open Vape, which is OPEN Vape, if you want to look this up. And he's going over sales figures, and he's talking about projections for 2017. And he says that in 2017, they believe that the state of Colorado will sell more concentrates than the flower. Colorado is on track to sell more concentrates than weed. So let's go back to the beginning of this thing when I said we got to change the way that we think about weed. We got to shift our construct a little bit. What we're going to get into right now is it feels extreme. And it feels extreme because it's so far removed from what most of us think about when we think about weed. It's not even like on the same platform. But remember that little deal at the beginning that we're probably going to sell more of this in Colorado than the flower, like weed. This is mainstream use. Young people are initiating on this. People are, we admitted a guy last year who was consuming 4 to 5 grams daily. You can find people on YouTube who are doing 13 grams at one time. This is not fringe use. This is mainstream use. So let's talk about it. And then we get to watch videos. Crack is whack. Crack kills. Say no to crack. Sound familiar? Well, kids, I'm here to tell you that not all crack is bad. Some crack is actually really, really good. It says that. It says that. Well, kids, I'm here to tell you not all crack is bad. We are talking about, of course, the crack cocaine of weed, which is actually what it's referred to a lot of the times. Here, let's do this one and then we'll go back to the next one. THC potencies in the mid-90s. Now, listen, I'll have a conversation with you subject matter experts later about this whole mid-90s thing, but for the most part, what I want you to take away from this first little part here is that, remember when I told you that we didn't know anything about the long-term or even short-term effects of THC above 16% on the brain and body? It says 95. Whoa. This is a wonderful advertisement. So this is some pretty real shatter. You can see how translucent it's probably run through a couple times, or it's on a real commercial grade. More is not better. Cannabis concentrates are potent. Start by consuming a small dose, about half the size of a pinhead or less. That's what that ad says. The ad by the manufacturer says, start by consuming about half the size of a pinhead or less. The reason I think that's funny is I like to think about somebody trying to cut off half the size of a pin. I'm not even sure what kind of tool you would use for this, but probably not even a scalpel. Some sort of lab equipment kind of deal that when you guys were learning about in high school, I was out back in high, but when you cut off half the size of a pinhead, and then the second is just the idea that we would do anything in this country half the size of a pinhead. We supersize our damn Big Macs around here. We don't have the prudence to consume half the size of a pinhead of anything. But let's say we do, and we have some issues associated with this. This next ad also couldn't say it much better. If you are ever feeling paranoid or anxious after using marijuana, by simply smelling or chewing on black pepper balls, you can mitigate marijuana's negative anxiety-inducing effects. No, you can't. Show me the journal in which that has been published, and I will change my whole approach to this. But what we're talking about here is the reaction that's associated with this kind of high-potency use. And this kind of high-potency use, this different than anything we've ever seen before. One of the comparisons that I hear the most, and if I were presenting to a group of high school kids, there would be a hand up right now and somebody would be like, it's the exact same thing as 3-2 beer versus Everclear. And I would say, no, it is not, because man has been distilling spirits from fruits and vegetables for millennium. You know how long we've been doing this? What, 5, 6 years? 5, 6-ish? No, it's not the same at all. And the idea that people will temper their use, you ain't ever hung around people who use. It's weed. So in a nutshell, and again, tough crowd in this front row with having to mind my P's and Q's, essentially, not exactly, the more liquid we extract from this, the more potent it will be. Go ahead. What? My example here, this would be the most potent form. So let's look at how we make it. Oh, shoot. We're going to look at how we make it in a second after I make this point. There's lots of different forms of concentrate. We're basically forcing a solvent through organic material to strip out what we want. And what we want is THC, because THC is what gets you high. What we don't want are solvents in what we're smoking, because you shouldn't smoke butane. But we're going to talk about that in just a second. This is the drug. This is the message. Are you going back to nature? Don't forget the natural cannabis. We're your concentrate headquarters. This is not a natural substance. This is not a substance that has a place in the world right now. Until we learn more about what's going on up here and in here with it, I get a little bit nervous. So we're going to cover 3 things. We're going to cover making, consuming, and trafficking. So making, yes. I'm going to watch one of my favorite dudes on YouTube. Did I do this wrong?
Hey, yo, what's up, everybody? It's Kai Love coming back at you from behind the orange curtain. I figured what better way to start than...
So I like this guy for a number of reasons. The first and foremost is he looks like that dude from 21 Jump Street and 22 Jump Street, and he's a funny cat. But he goes through the entire process with us. So as he's going through it, I'm going to narrate. And this is an at-home extraction process. I am not getting into closed loop because it's a totally different deal. And it's a totally different deal. So Junior here runs out of his concentrates. That's what he's talking about. He says, so we're going to make some more. So he's got a dish of shake. So the general rules that we use are about 1 ounce of shake is what we want to go with to make a batch. Junior's got his BHO. His butane. He has his butane. Junior, oh, hold on. You got to hear this part.
Extraction 2. I decided to go with the metal one over a glass one. I drop things, break things all the time.
He has a metal pipe that he's going to force a combustible material through at the end instead of a glass one, because he's always dropping shit and breaking it, and like, heaven forbid. So instead of a glass or PVC pipe bomb, he's actually going to make a metal pipe bomb for us and teach us something here in a minute. What's that guy's? He's got safety. What's that guy's name from Jonah Hill? Does he look like Jonah Hill? Like, I kind of, anyway, so what you're going to do is, in a totally secure and safe environment, like the back patio of your apartment. Here, listen, here's how we know it's an apartment complex. Listen to him talking.
Our oven meant to keep our hand nice and to.
Be cool. We don't want the neighbors to hear anything. So he goes onto the back porch, and he is going to force his solvent, which is going to be a butane, propane, some other stuff like Everclear or cold water. Anybody using anything else nowadays? Butane, come on, with your big words. Butane, propane, an Everclear kind of thing. And what he's going to do is force it through the organic material. So the reason why there's so much of this, and I'll share with you some of the advertisements specific to it, because we have so much shake in Colorado. When I was a kid and I bought a bag of weed, you would get a couple of buds, some stems, some seeds, some fill in the blank, and you get excited about the buds because you were actually going to get high, and then you would hope it wouldn't pop too much when you smoked it or when you rolled it, because those were the seeds and the everything else. We don't sell any of that in dispensaries in Colorado. You'll see when you watch the news, you see them using chopsticks to do it. That's consumer facing. We want to show you that we are not giving you anything other than buds. Rock solid, get you high buds. So we got all this trim, all this shake, that for a long time was throwaway, until somebody got wise to the game and they thought, hold up, man, hold up. So what we're doing is taking that shake, forcing the butane through it, and what we're left with, it takes a minute. See the liquid that's coming out? Basically what that is THC and propane. Now, very responsibly, young Mr. Hill went out onto the back patio, because butane is heavier than air. And a lot of the times what ends up happening, when you see the explosions and things, what ends up happening is, here, we need to wait for a second and I'll explain this process to you. It settles, right? So somebody does this in the house, it settles, and then a pilot light kicks on. And then, if you want to watch some funny stuff or some sad stuff and some crazy stuff, put in BHO explosion into YouTube, or heck, just talk to anybody. I'm sure there's enough first responders here. You guys have seen stuff, but it's wild how much of this we see in Colorado. In fact, I'll bet the explosion they just reported on the news, I'll bet you anything. So what he's doing at this point is purging the solvent from the liquid, because again, you shouldn't smoke butane. So he's getting as much of it out, and he's doing it in a way smarter way than a lot of people do. So you got to heat it up, right? And a lot of people are like, and these are a lot of the videos you'll see when you put that in, they heat it up and they throw it on the stove. And then the pilot light kicks on, and the, again, butane, propane. So he's purging this out. He only goes through the process once.
After I've done with blasting it, I've given it a hot water bath. I've scraped everything up and gathered everything into the middle of my collection pan. And then now I have it here sitting on my electric stove. It's on low heat, as you can see there. And then it's just going to sit here. It's going to help it purge a little bit more. I'll continue to whip it some as it sits there and it kind of gets softer. And this will help kind of get it turned into that waxy texture that we all know and love.
Seriously, who wears a Lance Armstrong bracelet? I've never noticed that. So, of note here, we started off with an ounce of shake. And look what we're down to. Because we've pulled everything. Remember all that other stuff I told you about? And we 200 to 500 chemicals, depending on where it is in the combustion process, THC, CBD. We got rid of all that crap. We got THC left.
After I whip, I'll just let it sit for a little bit. And I'll keep kind of doing this here for a couple of minutes. And then as the process progresses, I'll slowly here, I'll take my dial from low, and I'll just turn it down to simmer, which is probably a low heat. And then I'll finish it off that way. And then we'll go from there. I'll come back and we'll show you guys how to do it from there. Alright guys, so what's up? So we finished doing our water purge and our heat purge. We've recollected again, scraped it back up, and we put it on some parchment paper. Here's what it looks like now at this point.
That was an ounce a week.
And then from here, throw it in the freezer, let it cool down, let it set up and stabilize a little bit more.
Refrigerators have pilot lights also.
Here and take a dab. Stuff's pretty pure. It's a nice little shatter. So let's give it a try and see how it tastes.
Check the blowtorch. We're going to talk about consuming in a minute. This is going to be fun. There's a guy, Dr. Dabs, who in his dabbing 101, he wears a white jacket and everything. He says how you can't use the blowtorches you get at the gas station with the pejorative in there. He says you got to go get the real ones from Home Depot because this superheated needle's got to be about 700 degrees for this to work.
Cheers.
Don't worry, we're going to watch lots of the consuming. Yeah, of course he said cheers. Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Sorry, everybody. Come on, help, Sarah. Okay, got it. Never mind. I don't need your help. Look in the middle here, underneath the sign on 287. It's $50 for a Zia shake. You can actually get it for less than that, and that's consumer price. So this was kind of throwaway, but you can still absolutely get high off this stuff. Trust me. So the trimmings that were hitting the floor that were being thrown out because we're just selling buds, we found a use for. And we can now get $50 an ounce for it. And it actually, most grow operations can produce all of their own because they're just selling the bud. So all of the trim is what you use for this. But at $50 an ounce, that means, and that's a great example of the incredible availability of shake in Colorado. Shake or trimmings. So that being, of course, everything that's left over after you trim the plant up. Now to smoking it. I didn't want to watch Jonah Hill smoke it because I'd never be able to watch 21 Jump Street again. I want to see some other people smoking it.
Hey, this your boy Young Roscoe, man.
Like Young Roscoe.
Man, I want y'all to check out that motherfucking online.
Oh, sorry. Oh, you're cops, whatever. So young Roscoe, according, like, judging by social media posts and by everything else that's going on, and is a fairly dedicated marijuana user. He's got the shirt, he's got the hat, he's got the chain. Young Roscoe smokes a lot of weed, or at least represents smoking a lot of weed. Oh, and he's got a pound of weed with him. In all likelihood, young Roscoe smokes a lot of weed. Young Roscoe is going to take his first dab hit. The lady with him has got to heat the needle to about 700 degrees because, again, you can't roll this in a blunt. Now, that is paper thin, half the size of a Tic Tac kind of situation. Look. My man is rolling a blunt for as soon as he's done because all he's going to do is take this hit of concentrates and then move on with the night. But somebody bet him that he wouldn't be able to handle it. So see the young lady still heating the needle here. What I want you to notice at the beginning is how much of the tube Roscoe does not clear. He really only gets a tiny little bit of this thing. Oh, hold on. I should do that. Wait.
Oh my God.
Young Roscoe's like dead.
So you live on the Dab Show, dog. What's it?
You see an experienced user consuming for their first. We'll just let it play while I talk. Don't watch him. Watch her. You see an experienced user consuming something for the first time that's so potent that he is out cold after he clears a quarter of a tube of it. Remember that we're not talking about fringe use. We are absolutely talking about mainstream use. Watch this go. Out. Thousands and thousands and thousands of videos on YouTube with similar outcomes. One of the wild things about this is not just so something like that, right? This is a blood pressure and a heart rate thing, like somebody's fallen out. One of the really interesting things that happens are presentations that look very different than cannabis. So for those of you who work on the front lines of this thing, and let's talk specifically inside of traffic and whatnot, we are not looking at traditional signs of impairment from weed. This does not look like somebody who smoked a joint. So we've got this image, right, of what and in fact, we make jokes about it all the time. Our governor says stuff like goldfish and Cheetos or whatever. And we think, oh, they're just lazy sitting on the sofa doing there are so many amazing examples on YouTube, but I'm a pretty big fan of this one for a couple of different reasons. I'm going to get a chance to illustrate quite a bit here with this. So this guy's name, Stoners Are Weed, has a great channel on YouTube called Kill a Friend Day. And basically what he does is gets experienced marijuana users and gives them their first dab hit and then records what's taking place. So again, there are so many examples on YouTube, especially those of you on the front lines and who are in patrol cars. You might want to go on and watch some of these because I'm showing you this one as an example of how diverse reactions can be and how much they do not typically look like weed. We got a DRE or two in the room? Or 20? Let's see some of this stuff. You see obsessive tactile behaviors that you would never consider. It looks like a synthetic. It presents like a synthetic a lot of the times. You'll see an aggression. You'll see an energy burst. You really see behavior that you would more commonly associate with a synthetic. So Stoners Are Weed is going to give our boy his first dab hit. He's heating up the torch, and I'm actually going to play a little bit of it. We got to fast forward a minute.
I'm fucking scared. Go for it.
Again, notice how much he clears and doesn't clear. I mean, he got about an eighth of that in him. So coughing actually goes on for a while. There's actually anaphylaxis that can be associated with cannabis consumption. And you have seen, pause, not mute.
My show, man.
You see more of it with this kind of potent stuff. But he starts, I can't breathe. So he'll get his lungs back here in a minute. I seriously doubt it's a case of anaphylaxis, but every now and again that does happen. So as we go from the coughing, oh, damn it. What just happened? Sorry, everybody. I have absolutely no tech skills. All right, so as we go from the coughing and the choking to the puking, remember this all really quick. And remember this is about an eighth of a tube, and this is a dude who consumes all the time. So that is not behavior that you associate with immediate post-cannabis consumption at all. Here, let's just watch it. Shoot, we got time. That'll help. Have a Coke. That's love. That's love. Listen, man, I know you're on a channel called Kill a Friend Day and everything, but have a Coke.
Look up for a second. I'll see your face.
All right, so listen. This is especially because laughter can be contagious, and because as much as you can, try to observe this thing from a third-party perspective, especially from the perspective of law enforcement. Let's not get into the insanity with him, which is going to be hard to do. But what I'm asking you to observe here is the incredible difference between this presentation and typical weed presentations. So let's see if we can let it play without stepping on him too much with laughing.
Hey man, you haven't puked yet. That's a pro. A lot of the people on here puke. Man, he's a good sport. I love this guy.
Yeah, I love you too, man.
I kind of want to make dirty.
This is puke right there, but remember, this is obsessive tactile sort of stuff. This is the kind of thing you got like this, and I love the feeling and the texture of this, and that's not a weed thing usually.
Got it! Can he stand? There we go. Okay.
I want to be an MMA fighter, bro.
There you go.
Fucking.
That's ambition right there.
Fucking kick to the face.
I think it's gonna have to be a little bit faster than that, but I can see.
So I know he's saying something and demonstrating something very differently, like, oh, man, typically you don't see somebody who just took a hit of weed and is like, I'm going to be a fighter. And there's a lot of videos out there with people who are doing just that, who are having really intense reactions and breaking stuff and punching stuff and from the concentrate, like not something that you would associate with weed use typically. Why did that just come up? Here's how you smoke it. We just watched a bunch of people smoking it with smoking it on a superheated needle. So you were familiar with this concept? Anybody work Vice? Nobody? Oh, good. They're the really sick ones, aren't they? I usually get along well with them. The concept is hot knifing. The concept is a superheated needle. It's what we did. So I was in Washington in the mid 90s, and it's like literally taking a knife and putting it inside of a burner for a stove till it gets red hot. You drop the rock on it and you hover above it and you just inhale it as it vaporizes up. It's the exact same concept. So you're getting something to 700, 720 degrees, and it's kind of ideal. And then you're introducing the substance to it. It's basically vaporizing it, and you're consuming it. So this is the vaporizer that started it all. These guys made an adjustable product that had 3 temperature settings. It had a low for organic material, weed. It had a medium for oil. What do you think that oil combusts at? Do you know?
I mean, that one was the low was for flour, and then it was 790.
That's the 900. That, so as was explained to me very thoroughly at lunch, the optimal temperatures for combusting cannabis concentrates are nowhere near 900 degrees. That is an optimal temperature for combusting something like meth. So you have this pen that can combust at 3 different temperature settings. And we're going to talk about vaporizing in a minute, so I'm not going to spoil it. Here you got something like this that's just combusting the concentrate oil that's going to be about 700 degrees. So we're all familiar with vaporizers. They've kind of hit mainstream. We know what the drill is. Nicotine vaporizers are not combusting at 700 to 900 degrees. Or we can use a commercial dab rig. So the commercial dab rig is something that you plug into a wall that heats the needle to the 700 plus degrees. There's one of about 200 that are for sale on Amazon, 200 different brands, not 200 different machines. If you want to check that out, it's got a cool little carrying case and everything. And again, it's just a game changer when it comes to consuming anything in rock form. Or you use a blowtorch. There was actually a really interesting case, and since we do have time to talk about it, I will. There was a really interesting case that we dealt with inside of our hospital of a young man who was speedballing with his vaporizer. Because it can get so hot so quickly, he was putting in heroin, hitting it, clearing the chamber, putting in crack, hitting it, and his heart stopped, and we had to. But you can speedball with these now, which again, totally different. Speedballing is almost always done intravenously. I mean, there's some people who do it by smoking, but they have no commitment to the process, if you ask me. So I'm not altogether normal, whatever. If we're going to be friends, you should know that. This is weed. Identifying. CO2 wax. Here's your kind of more traditional forms of shatter. You note the different complexions and consistencies that we can take on here. When we're talking about identifying, particularly law enforcement, you got to be aware of the incredible diversity that exists inside of this. Just remember, American-style ingenuity, coupled with a little bit of capitalism. So, that's weed, right? Or at least that's what I was hoping in the first 15 minutes to describe to you as weed. It's not the plant. It's not something that you dry out a leaf and consume. It's at best a bud. And a lot of the times it's what we call infused marijuana. That's a bud that's sprayed with a concentrated THC, which in fact there was somebody in Cheyenne who told me a couple of weeks ago that they had tested a bud in the mid 60% THCs. He said, how's that possible? Well, it's got to be infused. That's the only way that's possible. Nobody's growing that intense. No. I got to add for 39.8%, but that's, you got an entry for 43 in flour? So that's weed. That's weed. That's weed. And that's weed. And the sooner those of us who are in this space get it through our brains that we are talking about weed, and all of this stuff, the sooner we can have more effective interventions with the people who we work with. Because we are still at best talking about this. The reality is that the legal definition in Amendment 64 and in every law that has passed since, aside from the CBD specific ones, thank you DPA, says every salt, derivative of, extract, and concentrate of the plant, marijuana, cannabis, sativa. That's legally weed, and practically this is weed. And realistically, there's more of this that's going to be consumed this year in Colorado than the flower. That's all weed. From the gooey to the chunky to the shattery. That's weed. It's probably about $30,000 worth of weed, but that's weed. That's weed. Right? Like, there's a bunch out there who are like, that ain't weed. That ain't weed. No, you're right. It's totally not weed. But practically, absolutely, this is weed. So let's talk about trafficking. I'm going to get through this quick so we can get to the traffic safety part. Look, $550 an ounce. Where's my, oh, dang it. Check this out, $5.50 an ounce last year, $4.20 an ounce this past 4/20. So DEA in Florida told me that if I got that ounce of weed to them, that ounce of concentrate, shatter, it would be worth between $8,500 and $9,500. So put on your delinquent hat here, or if you don't have a delinquent hat, I'll tell you how it works. When you sell weed, you're not selling it to get money. You're selling it to get high. Because there's this great chapter in the last Freakonomics book that says why drug dealers live at home. You don't actually make a lot of money selling it. What you do is you buy an ounce. The ounce gets cut into eighths. You can smoke a quarter for free. It's simple. It's how the math works. With this, though, let's say I could buy a Z of this stuff for $420. Any idea what street value would be in Laramie? Any? I don't know either. I'm telling you that like about as far as I can get from Colorado is going to be the most extreme, so that $8,500 to $9,500. But instead of buying an ounce, cutting it into eighths, and smoking a quarter for free, here's the way this works. I, as a Coloradan, can purchase 2 ounces at a time of this. Because we screwed up, no, we actually didn't screw up. They knew exactly what they were doing in Pending A64. That's treated exactly the same as the flower is. So as a Colorado resident, I can buy 2 ounces a day. Remember when I said we didn't have any centralized data collection repository? You know what else we don't have? Any repository for checking who's bought what each day. So there's a place right next to where I used to work where I can stand in the middle of the street and hit 4 dispensaries with a rock. And I use your credit card at all of them. All of them you use your credit card at now, even though it's illegal. I walk into the first place and I scan my credit card, and for $840 I buy 2 ounces of wax. Then I walk across the street and I buy 2 ounces, and across the street and I buy 2 ounces, across the street. In an afternoon, with the proliferation, there's 790 stores in the metro. Like in an afternoon, without even working super hard at it, I could probably put together 5, 6, 7 pounds. So from a trafficking standpoint, let's say I wanted to bring, where's my trafficking picture? Oh, it's later here. Let's say I wanted to bring $100,000 worth of weed to Oklahoma to sell from Colorado, because Colorado's got a good reputation for his weed, and I'm gonna make some money. I would need a U-Haul. I would have to hope that I didn't get within 3 miles of anybody who'd ever been around the block and 10 miles of any dog, because there would be like a green vapor behind me going down the highway. But if I made it there, I could make some money. You know what I would do if I wanted to take $25,000 worth of concentrates from Colorado to resell them? Where would you put it?
In my purse.
Sarah'd put it in her purse. I would put it, I have a cooler that I keep a couple of sodas and a couple of my beef jerky in. Where would you put it? In a cup. Why not? What I would do is I would take and I'd buy all that and I'd put it all together and compress it because it gets sticky and stick with it. And I would freeze it so that everything's nice and ready to rock and roll. And then I would vacuum seal it in the thing that I do my jerky in. And I would probably then vacuum seal it again. And then I'd throw it in a cooler, or you know what, if I really wanted to have fun with you, I would hollow out a section of my big book or of a Bible, and I would put it right in the middle, and I'd throw it on my front seat. I know for damn sure y'all ain't asking, is that a Bible, son? Would you like to talk about it? I mean, or any other great religious book. Imagine if I put it in like a Book of Mormon, you wouldn't ask me anything about it. Would you like to tell me about that? I'm glad you asked. I told no more coffee. I told Ashley absolutely no more coffee. This is good. I couldn't sleep last night, so I walked across the street and I watched Guardians of the Galaxy at 10 o'clock, which is probably a terrible idea. And now I'm wired, not tired. Then I'd throw it in a cooler where I'd put that book right on my seat. And you know what? You wouldn't know nothing. And I think if I put it in a couple of different layers of sealing, I don't think your dog would know nothing. I'm not 100% sure there, but I think it'd be a hard sell because it's pretty different. So, from a trafficking standpoint, I mean, look at this stuff. Look at how thin this is. From a trafficking standpoint, it still trips me out every time I see a news report when they're like, I was talking to a friend in Northern California this morning in law enforcement, and she was like, yeah, we just got somebody at the border, the California-Nevada border, and they had 30 pounds of weed on them. But the way the new law in California is written, that was a misdemeanor. So they confiscated the weed. They'll probably have to give it back because he's going to sue like what we do in Colorado all the time. And the guy walked away. 30 pounds of weed. But anyway, I still snicker every time I hear that because I'm like, oh, you caught a guy with 30 pounds worth of plant. You know who you didn't catch? And I was given a talk. I don't even remember where I was. It was some other state. And the guy said, it wasn't too far away. And the guy said to me, he said, we got no concentrates here. It was law enforcement. And I was like, he said, we haven't seen any of that. And I was like, it's because you're not looking for it, dog. Like, it's not because it's not here. You got it. Because let me tell you how incentives work. If there's money to be made doing it, somebody's going to make that money doing it. And the number of people who I have known who have trafficked this stuff who've ended up in treatment is crazy. There was a gal who we worked with. HIPAA makes all my good stories like so boring, so I can't tell you a lot of details about it. But so this gal we worked with, who every 3 weeks they made a Chicago run. And it was just a suburban house that they had the downstairs, and then they had an outdoor greenhouse. And her and her boyfriend, and running to Chicago, this is concentrates they were selling. They were making 50 G's a month. Listen, if there's that kind of money to be made, it's being made. So, shift a little bit. That's all weed. We don't think about this as weed. That's weed. Especially those of you in law enforcement. And oh my goodness, are we ready to give you a crack at trying this stuff. 30% off. Wait, 40% off. Hold up, 2 for $50. Hang on. I'm tired of selling this to all the adults because you guys don't make as great a customer even though you're better. Come in for Waxy Wednesday and Saturday. Not 21? Get your red card today. Not sure how? Come in, we'll tell you. Hey, your red card's your med card because you can buy under 21 if you got that. So add specifically for Wax and for Shatter, specifically targeting those under 21. Over 100 varieties of hash and concentrates. Something for everybody, man. There's something. Wax, Shatter, and concentrates. 20% off Mondays and Tuesdays. Look. If people who are making this stuff continue to make advertisements comparing dab users to zombies, I will keep photographing those advertisements and showing them to the world. Don't use concentrates. It turns you into a zombie. Look at this dude, dabs. Need more dabs. Oops, where I did that one. Hey, y'all know Snoop Dogg sells weed? Nope. Snoop Dogg sells concentrates. Willie sells weed because Willie's all like, well, let's smoke a little weed because it don't matter. Because Willie loves weed. I don't know that Willie loves money. We have loves money. Snoop Dogg loves money. Have you got prices that exceed that of platinum per gram when you get out of state? You better believe people are going to be marketing in this stuff. Yeah, Snoop sells concentrates. So look, 710 is oil upside down. July 10th is the day, not April 20th. Stop saying 420. You sound old. They're laughing at you when you walk away. Say 710, and the kids can be like, I don't know what that means. I like these because they're kid sizes. I was giving a talk in Buffalo. And I was at a high school, and I showed this, not another slide. Where's dab life? Dabbing would be the verb of consuming a concentrate. And the principal recognized that somebody in the school was wearing a shirt that said, I heart dabs that day. So we got to go and have a conversation with the young man. So look, this is from somebody who's in and out of this kind of thing every day. I see a lot of this gear being worn. And I'll tell you, I never miss an opportunity to have a conversation with a young people who's wearing it. Again, these are all kid sizes here. Because if someone who's bold enough to walk around with a shirt that says that they love dabs or oil or 710 or whatever, I figure that they're asking for a conversation. And the way that conversation can't go is if I come at them. Because if I come at them, they're not going to hear anything. But I love just asking questions. So I'm going to encourage you guys in Wyoming as you see this, as this is a substance that does not have a place in the world. Until we better understand what it's doing to brains and bodies, nobody should be consuming this. And so as you see this stuff around, like here's how the conversations would go. Like, oh, I heart dabs, 710. What's that mean? Nothing. I don't even know. No, actually, I know what it means. That's concentrates. That's a concentrated form of weed. It's THC. And then they're going to go like this. I didn't. No, it's just a shirt. Someone gave it to me. Like, actually, man, I doubt that. I think most people. No, these are the conversations I have with the young people. Like, nah, come on, man. I wasn't born last night. Like, I know it's not, and I know people wear that sort of stuff around for a reason. Cool out. Because that's something that's doing some crazy stuff. I was in this session and I heard this. I engage people with this sort of stuff. It's an ad during the X Games. She probably needed more wax. Slipped and fell. Snowboarding, she probably needed more wax. If you're headed to watch the X Games, you need the proper supplies. Because the proper supplies for snowboarding include, are you freaking kidding me? This is my favorite. That says free dab. So does that, free dab. I'm going to make it through this next part without cussing. You know who else does that? You know that's a technique that I've seen around once or twice. And I think a lot of people in this room who grew up in maybe similar situations to mine. I grew up on public assistance in a high school where I was a minority in a scary city in the mid-90s. And you know who gave us everything for free the first time? Yeah. Because if I can give it to you the first time for free, you know what you're going to do the second time? You're going to pay me for it. This isn't community altruism. This isn't giving back to Denver. That's on Santa Fe downtown. This isn't giving back to Denver. This is first one's free, second one ain't. And that's how you get somebody to come around and be your person for long periods of time. We've covered edibles, which was fun. Look, trip down memory lane. Remember when we talked about suckers? Oh. Remember the sex spray joke? That was good. Here's all you got to know about vaping. No smoke, no smell, no mess. You got it? No smoke, no smell, no mess. The Colorado Resource Officers put something fun out last year, or was it this year when they met, about how kids aren't even like skipping class or going to the bathroom to consume. They're doing it in the back of class now. You should see the variety of products. I'll show you some. There's actually functional highlighters that have THC vaporizers built into them. There's quite a selection and quite a variety of THC-specific vaporizers, from the disposable to the reusable, to the things that aren't supposed to look like vaporizers, to the things that really, really aren't supposed to look like vaporizers. This was an amazing write-up in the Denver Post. So I got a super asthmatic 8-year-old. We can't go anywhere without his inhaler. And the opening line to this said, "Are you tired of not being able to take your medicine in public like everybody else?" I thought I had like an unending amount of time, and so I put a lot in here. I'm not going to skip this, even if it's only the last 10 minutes, but I want to cover some traffic specific. Till what? 4:30. Yeah, but this psychosis one can be interesting. Look, we're still getting high. Hey, I've never seen these. Let's see what. Oh, dang it. What's she going to do? It just keeps playing, I guess. I've never seen one.
No homo, pause. Hit that shit, nigga.
Hit
that shit, nigga. Hit that shit. There you go.
Water.
Hit that shit. If I had $1. Listen, it's going to get bad if I get tired. This is going to go from PG-13 to R. But okay, so my friend Aaron Holmes, who's amazing and works for the Foundation for Advancing Alcohol Responsibility, gave this brilliant presentation 2 weeks ago that I sat in on this issue. And when I called her last week and said, "Are you cool if I borrow a couple of your slides?" She's like, "Use the whole thing. I don't care." And I said, "How about if you just send me a couple of slides?" And she's like, "Seriously, I don't care." I said, "Okay, how do you want me to credit you?" And she said, "Don't even worry about it." And I am absolutely crediting this amazing you should, the stuff that she's forgotten more about this than most of us understand. Aaron Holmes was the director of traffic safety. This was what we each presented at the Northern California Cannabis Summit. So what is interesting here, and she sent it in a PDF because it was so big. That was Canada's prime minister. She's a Canuck. So she has to, "Oh, my president's cuter than yours," whatever. So let's talk some specific weed traffic stuff. This is amazing data. And again, thanks to Aaron for providing all of this and for letting me use it. In 2015, 57% of fatally injured drivers were tested for drugs. So national average is a little over half. That'll be important to remember in a moment. 35.6 of them had marijuana in their system. I still don't understand this, so we're just going to skip it. The drug that's shown the largest increase in weekend nighttime prevalence is THC. This was, check this out. In 2017, there's a random survey that's a self-report thing. 8.6% of weekend nighttime drivers tested positive for THC. That number increased to 12.6 in 2014. That's almost a 50% increase in 6 years. It's not because they're catching more people. It's because we have continued to deliver this message to young people that it's totally cool. and it's not really an intoxicant. Weekend use, this survey from 2015 showed us that almost 12% on the weekdays, and weekends is 12.5% of all motorists surveyed reported marijuana use. Oh no. Is that going to go away? So Colorado and Washington. I had a really cool graph of this that I created myself, and I couldn't figure out, it looked stupid every time I kept trying to do it. So let's just go with Aaron's. Marijuana-related traffic deaths increased 48% in the 3-year average since legalization. That's pretty considerable. I understand who I'm talking to here. You guys understand the significance of this kind of thing. Now, we test less than half of all traffic fatalities for illicit drugs. What is it? Sir, do you know? We test less than half of all traffic fatalities in Colorado for substances. What we found in those less than half that we test, in the 6 years, 2009 to 2015, so 2009 was interesting because that's when we started allowing dispensaries to begin with. 2015 was after 1 year of retail recreational sales. You see that the number of those that we tested that turned back positive for weed had doubled. That puts this into the fairly significant category. Oh, look, there it is. 49% of drivers in traffic fatalities were tested for drugs. Of those tested, a quarter of them came back positive for weed. This was the graph that I had that I couldn't make work out because it showed a nice little arc up. Percentage of tested positive for marijuana and total fatalities in 2013 was 14.7, 2013, 14.7, 2014, 19.2, and 2015, 21. Erin, when she gave this presentation, she said this is not enough to yet establish a pattern, statistically. When I see a graph that goes like this, I don't know, but I'm not that bright. Total arrests for DUIDs is reported by the Colorado State Patrol in 2014. Marijuana only was 354. A DUID involving weed, 674. Out of a total 874. And I will tell you that at least I hope about 5 of these are from my star CSP that I dial every time I witness somebody consuming in a car around me, which I see open consumption several times a month. And I would say I see open consumption in a vehicle 5-6 times a year. Some of this was over my head. You guys will have all these slides. And again, Erin was really gracious in being willing to share these. This to me was the most interesting part. So we had this idea in Colorado that we were going to stop everybody from drinking if we gave them weed. So there's this idea called polysubstance abuse. And in 2014, which was the first year of legal recreational sales, I don't know if you paid attention to this sort of thing, but 2014 was the highest ever alcohol tax that we'd collected in the state of Colorado. People weren't doing a lot of replacing, they were doing a lot of putting them together. And Erin says, and says a whole lot better than I can, that the 1 + 1 = 3 when we're talking about polysubstance abuse. Have you guys covered a lot of this here, Ashley, how these all work together? And I am not the best person to present it. Sarah is. Here's what you got to understand, that low amounts of marijuana combined with low amounts of alcohol cause severe impairment that are considerably more than just the lower amounts of alcohol or the low amounts of marijuana. 1 + 1 = 3. Combining substances has, whatever that long way of saying multiply, effect on a collision risk. Combining alcohol and marijuana is super common. We've got some numbers. So there's also something that, and I think we have the survey results in here. Sorry, you can tell that obviously this one is not mine. These are the results that, or these are the perceptions that people have of marijuana-induced driving. And this is some, so I actually had the head of normal, the last head of normal, argue with me on a radio show that smoking weed and driving wasn't bad because it makes you a more careful driver, because it slows you down. Did some law enforcement chuckle? You know that the number one reason why law enforcement in Colorado will pull you over, the number one reason why they pull people over who end up being intoxicated on marijuana, speeding. So we have this idea that it's the person who's going 25 down Interstate 70, which is a pretty severe problem to begin with, but it's not. And then the perceptions are that drug driving is not a serious problem. And actually the gal from Channel 5 asked me, she said, where does that come from? It's super simple where that comes from. The DPA, the MPP, Safer, Normal, they put out talking points so that the young people can say this. There's this great, and I'll get into it when I talk about the acute effects, there's this great perception out there that not only, and listen, we can all stand here and snicker about it, and you guys don't bring me in to talk about the numbers, you bring me in to talk about the practical application. We can say that's stupid, how can anybody think that? I get it, but they think it, and they genuinely believe it. The kids, there's a really famous survey that a big insurance company did that showed that about 20% of all of the kids who were surveyed told them that driving under the influence of marijuana actually made them better drivers. So not only is it like, it's not even a neutral thing, like we know driving impaired is bad. We have convinced people of this, adults of this. And you guys know I'm the last person to come and lecture, or this is the last group to lecture the complexities of figuring impairment out with a substance that metabolizes in an utterly unpredictive way, that what's 0.5 nanograms per milliliter, what is that even? That is not a scientific understanding of what impairment is with this thing. What it is another number pulled from collective asses. It is a substance that manifests so differently in users that you could have somebody be stone cold sober and cool to drive 2 hours post-consumption, or somebody who's still not fit to operate 18 hours. There's a famous study of pilots, and you guys know all this one, but who report absolute no impairment after marijuana consumption. Remember, we're talking about like a 4 to 7% product that they've got. They report no consumption at intervals after, no impairment at intervals after consumption. Then they put them in a simulator, and these guys show significant impairment. There's this great gap in understanding, particularly between the young people and us, because they believe that it's not a big deal. They believe that some drug use doesn't adversely affect driving ability. Some drug use actually improves driving ability due to compensation strategies. I said there were a number of DREs in the room. Care to weigh in on that? Driving high is a safer alternative to driving drunk. Driving high isn't illegal. I hear this one very regularly. It's legal. Weed's legal. It's not a per se limit. The really smart ones are the ones who've read like 3 articles on HuffPost. They're going to tell you that it's not a per se legal limit. Do you even know what that means? No, you probably don't know what that means. But they really don't think that it's an illegal thing because weed's legal. They also genuinely believe that the likelihood of detection and apprehension for drug driving is low. Check this one out. This is from a recent Gallup poll that this was one of the 2 slides that I really, really wanted to share with you. Perception of alcohol and driving under the influence as being very serious. 79% of the respondents showed this as very serious. 18 as somewhat, and only 2 as not much. Marijuana is 29% said that it's very serious. 39 said somewhat, and 31 said it is not much of a problem at all. 31% compared to 2%. Whoa. But that should give us an idea into the mentality of the young people. So this is that same Gallup poll. Americans 18 to 29 are the most likely to say drinking and driving is a very serious problem. Why? Because we have hammered them with PSAs since the time they were born, teaching them about this. This group is also the least likely to consider marijuana impaired driving as an issue. Look at half of the people in this Gallup poll said that legalization will have no impact on traffic safety. When we have data that's very, very contrary to that. Not this. You know what? This is all, you need Aaron to do, or you need Sarah to do this. I'm going to stop stepping on it because this ain't me. Oh, you are? It's because it's the kid's last day of school. I know, and I'm going to take him to burritos tonight if I can get out of here in time. If you want to talk afterwards and I'm a jerk, I'm sorry. I promised my kids I'd take them to Qdoba tonight to celebrate school getting out. Why Qdoba? Because that's what I felt like paying for. All right. Cannabis and psychosis. Let's get back to what Ben really knows. Weed and crazy. 2 years ago, a delegation came down from Canada, and they were studying the issue to go back to write a report. They wrote an amazing report, and the fact that Canada's moving ahead in the way that they are in 2018 is totally contrary to this report, because it was a heck of a report. It was just too much heavy lifting, I guess. But they sent this big delegation down, and they pulled a ton of people together to have these conversations with the public health experts from Canada, and I got to go to it. And so one of the meetings that we had was at Denver PD, and everybody's in a room, and they're talking to us about, or we were all going to talk about different things, and the person who kicked it off was Colorado's weed czar. You know, the governor's right hand on all things weed. So this person starts saying about how everything's awesome in Colorado. We got no issues because, you know, politics 101, you can oppose something till you got to be the one responsible for implementing it, and then you can't, it will not fail. No matter what, it will not fail, because then you would have to accept some level of that. So they're talking about how great it's been in Colorado, and how we haven't had any issues, and we've worked out the ones we had really quickly. And one of the docs from Canada says, yeah, well, what about, no, she didn't say what about, she said probably what about potency? And the person from the governor's office was like, oh yeah, that really, who could have seen that one coming? I mean, this really caught us all off guard. We didn't, I couldn't handle it. You weren't there, were you? This was before I knew you. I stood up and I yelled, and I actually got a high five from the chief, because he said, look, we get checks from the state, we can't do that kind of thing. And she said, who would have seen it coming? And I said, I did. My colleagues did. Everyone I know did. We wrote white papers. We published op-eds. We jumped up and down at every town hall telling people, look at the trajectory, and for crap's sake, we don't know what this potent of weed is doing to people's brains and bodies. We told you this was going to happen. And then I made an ostrich and head in the sand thing, and then this person literally got up and walked out of the room without saying a single thing. This is that issue today. This is the me jumping up and down, publishing papers. All of the people who I work with inside of this field who are paying really close attention, this is the thing that we are like saying, please listen to us on this, because 5 years from now, everybody's going to be like, who could have seen that coming? And the results for not paying attention to this one are a big, big deal. Remember that Lancet study I talked about an hour and a half ago or 2 hours ago or yesterday, whenever it was, it's been so freaking long. That study, technical data, that study, where is this thing? Teaches us that a person who consumes high potency cannabis, between 12 and 16% THC, high potency, 5 times a week, is 30% more likely to develop psychosis than the control. 2 times a week is 17% more likely. Let's take the word cannabis out of this and just go, let's insert some sort of weird chemical that's in the plastic of this bottle. And consuming something out of this bottle 5 times a week is increasing my likelihood of developing psychosis by 1/3. You know what we got here? We have a public health crisis. If it came from China, we would ban everything they made. If it was a water bottle, we would say don't even drink any sodas because you might have some of the same stuff inside of it. Because psychosis, either a psychotic episode or a psychotic break, are not laughing matters. And the difference between an episode and a break is at the end of a break, you might not come back. Your brain chemistry permanently shifts. We had a report that came out of UCH, the hospital I was at. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Wyoming. I was with you. I was in Jackson. 2 weeks ago. That showed a quadrupling of cases of cannabis-induced psychosis ages 15 to 18, 2015 to 2016. Quadrupling of cannabis-induced psychosis. Like, I will literally jump up and down if it would get people to listen to this. This is going to be the story, man. Cannabis and mental health. Because you remember when I was explaining to you how it's not so much about the THC, it's about the difference between the THC and the CBD? You know, one of the things that we do a good job of stripping out of all of the weed when we were making concentrates? I gave this talk, that summit, that all the slides from Aaron's that I just presented that I gave at, and I had the guy who owned the local dispensary in town, and then a guy who was a vocational grower come up to me afterwards and like talk about what else they were going to do in life, because this was so impactful to them to hear it. Cannabis and psychosis. Ever using cannabis is associated with a 1.5 time increased risk of psychosis, and regular use 2 times. That's ever using. High potency, frequent use, and here's the real one for this, genetic susceptibility, so some sort of predetermination, is associated with a potential increase in risk of 8-fold. So there's this constant question inside of our world, inside of treatment and mental health, and is causation or correlation? Does the substance user use the substance to feel normal, self-medicating? It's the language we use. Because they have mental health disorders, or do the mental health disorders come from the substance use? Age-old question. We've got some ideas here from some recent research. One of the things that I can tell you for sure, here's a big blanket statement that always holds true with it. If there's a pre-existing condition, most of the time it will make it worse. It's tossing a little gas on the fire. If there's not a pre-existing condition, you stand the risk of establishing a condition. Use before the age of 18, you see a 2.5-time increased risk of the diagnosis of schizophrenia. Look, that's dose responsive. So simple math on this. Use more, risk increases. Use less, risk decreases. And here's some hopeful news in this one, that the risk is 3 1/3 time increase if you used within 3 years of diagnosis, and 1.5 if within 7. So what that would indicate is that this amazing organ between our ears is doing a good job of healing itself, if we allow it and if we give it some time. We've learned some other things IQ-wise and stuff that would probably... Other mental health effects. Before I get to, I want to tell you that cannabis use is contraindicated, meaning that it makes it worse for use with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. You know, those are all areas that they're pushing, and PTSD they're actually getting through, pushing in Colorado to have cannabis be a treatment for. Things that it's contraindicated for. The risk of depression is 1.5 times higher if you consume. We don't know if that's causal. That has not yet been established. Acute anxiety, that is an established, that's causal. That's not a correlation. Acute anxiety is causal. Increased risk of anxiety disorders. It's not established whether or not it's causal, but there's a great correlation. Worsened outcomes in bipolar disorder. I don't know if it's causal. There's a brilliant doc who I work with who said maybe that's because it makes it harder for psychiatrists to get meds right when the patient's always kind of changing their brain chemistry, which would make really good sense. So, and this is when some of the groups that I work with, I do a lot of consulting in the world, and some of the groups that I work with, when they saw that was the end of the conversation for them. If there's a risk of suicide attempt that requires hospitalization, that's 2 times higher if you consume. They aren't waiting to determine whether or not that's causal. So listen, it's an impairment thing too, right? Like most people who try to hurt themselves, there's some impairment involved. But if you're looking at a substance that can lead to risk of suicide attempts that's a multiplier of 2, like stop. This is a big deal. Cannabis withdrawal syndrome. I share this with you guys and encourage you guys to consider this because it's so interesting in having these conversations with young people. This is way atypical. Withdrawal symptoms peak at 4 days. Acute withdrawal, acute, can last up to 16 days. That's nutty. Here's some signs and symptoms. Craving, restlessness, nervousness, sleeplessness, irritability, depression, anger, strange dreams, loss of appetite, headache, chronic vomiting is a big one. These are interesting. Also note that they're more severe in women. It's incredibly unpredictable to determine how somebody's going to detox from it as well. So if opiates are your thing, or booze is your thing, or benzos are your thing, and you tell me you're using history, and I know your age, and I know your sex, and I'm not a doctor, and I can give you a half-decent idea of what your detox is going to look like, because I've seen enough of them. This is so unpredictable, we can't even get to guessing what that's like, but forget it. Okay, acute physical effects. This is what I can really share with those of you who are not DREs and haven't studied this excessively, is you have things like impaired memory. Put these two together from a traffic safety standpoint. Impaired motor coordination and impaired judgment. And again, I mentioned the perception. One of the things that you got with weed that's different is somebody might check So they might say, okay, I'm 10 out of 10 sober to drive. And then when you put them in a simulator, post-weed consumption, you put them in a simulator, they're 2 out of 10 able to interact with what's going around them. But you've got an impaired judgment saying, I'm totally cool to drive, coupled with motor coordination. Increased heart rate, which we'll talk about that being issue long-term. Increased risk of angina, heart attack in those with previous heart attacks, and heart attacks and stroke in those without. Now this is I never have this fight with people because it just is too much. Nobody's ever died from smoking weed. Like actually there's quite a few examples in the literature of people dying immediate post-consumption, but it wasn't the weed that did it. It was the weed that spiked the heart rate or that changed the blood pressure dramatically. There's actually quite a few examples of that. We just I never get into it because it doesn't matter. I do a lot of work with professional athletes, the NFL specifically, and the electrolyte imbalance. It's really interesting for people to consider who are using this when working out. We actually have cannabis gyms in Colorado. If you haven't seen you got to read some of the articles about this stuff, the working out on weed, and the Denver Post runs a weekly thing about it. Chronic effects. This is one that I never miss talking, even if people only want to talk about concentrates or something. I never miss covering this one. The chronic effects in pregnancy include reduced birth weight, altered brain development, including changes in the reward system part of the brain, teenage children with poor academics. So there's a group of doctors in Colorado Springs who officially stopped recommending breastfeeding because there's so much THC being passed from the mother to the child. THC passes the placental barrier. THC in utero goes straight to the developing child's brain. THC ingested by a mom is passed on to the developing brain of the child. And this is a huge deal, especially when you have some populations in Colorado testing at 55% positive for THC when they deliver. 55% of the population is THC positive when they deliver a baby. This is a message that's being given to moms, so you should use it for morning sickness. Ashley was telling me some great stories about this yesterday. You should use it for morning sickness. You should use it for muscle, for cramps, you should use it for everything, including everything when you're pregnant. You should not. If people talk to you about this, talk to them about the evidence. That also includes teenage children with poor academic outcomes. We're about to say there's a huge study underway at UCH. Reduce verbal learning, memory, attention. Significant potential loss for IQ points. Increased risk of bronchitis, all respiratory things. It is carcinogenic. The trick here is, you guys have heard about the issue. I've never been able to do a good job establishing a link because you don't smoke it that much. And it's very hard to find a group of people who consume just this and don't smoke tobacco. Check this last one. Increased risk of testicular cancer. Talk to a young kid about this, and they're going to tell you that it keeps you from getting testicular cancer. That's actually one of the great urban legends out there, that it keeps you from getting testicular cancer. I love, when I'm talking to the young guys about this, I'm like, actually the evidence is different. Like, what do you mean? It increases your chances of getting cancer in your balls. And they're like, what? Yeah, ball cancer. Look it up. That gets the young people's attention pretty quickly. They used to tell us that a decreased sperm count, it does. They used to tell us that a decreased sperm count. When I was like 15, we were all like, yeah! Do the math. Like, we were into that idea. Therapeutic values that have been established. Relieves nausea. So again, I am not talking about smoking a plant. I'm talking about marijuana-derived medications, components of, found within things like Sativex, Marinol, Epidiolex, some really interesting things that are out there. Relieves nausea, increases appetite, reduces muscle spasms and spasticity. There is yet no solid evidence to say that it relieves chronic pain. Now, any of you guys who deal with chronic pain, and I've broken 34 bones, including a neck, and I live in a lot, like this is going to be a long drive home after standing this long. I get the chronic pain side, and any of you who know you live with it, you think, well, if I get high, it's going to feel better, right? It's not going to relieve it. So think about it this way. If I come to your town 150 years ago, and I'm a snake oil salesman, and you got a toothache, and I sell you 110 proof, you ain't going to feel your toothache no more, man. I didn't do anything to help the decay. So it's the same thing that's going on here is we might be, it's like a neuroinhibitor. It's like an opiate, a thing that blocks the signal from your body telling your brain that it hurts. It's not fixing it. It's a part of the problem that we get into in this country is we're not doing the anti-inflammatories and the adjunctive therapies that help people stay loose and get feeling better. We're just giving them a thing that tells their brain that it doesn't actually hurt. It'll do that. Any intoxicant is going to make it so that it doesn't hurt, but it's not going to be fixing anything. Reduced interocular pressure for glaucoma? No. Read the paper that the American Glaucoma Society wrote on this. Relieves anxiety? Contraindicated. And it's actually being sold as one, and the same with PTSD. Here's what we do know that it affects positively. Systems of cancer and chemotherapy, chronic wasting disease associated with AIDS, HIV, spasticity of muscles and multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, specifically Dravet syndrome. Those are some interesting indicators, but you know why that's not ever going to... So GW Pharmaceuticals, the guy who owned the patents on one of those drugs I just mentioned, they've been trying to unload it for the last 7 years because nobody uses Marinol and Sativex because it don't get you high. So the stuff that's actually helping out with some of this ain't worth nothing on the open market. There's little niches. So there are, we almost all of us saw Sanjay Gupta's piece about weed solving everything. The headline says, "Weed cures epilepsy." Really what it was a component inside of weed. Did some really amazing things for one particular young lady. But the idea that you have this one big miracle drug has taken away from the real research into these other things and often leads to some bad outcomes, like patients coming off their anticonvulsants. But so everyone in the world saw that special. So they all moved to Colorado. I'm sure you saw this, and you even read the stories on Yahoo, like family in Texas with crazy marijuana laws that won't let you traffic moves to Colorado. Like awful Wyoming, where you can't sell dozens of pounds of weed at once. They forced this family to move to Colorado. You know how many patients are on our registry for any sort of epileptic issue? 240. Out of 136,000. If you're interested in the pharmacology, this was a really great doc I know who put that together. Identifying individuals with depression, adolescents and young adults, adults in states with commercialized marijuana, and probably people who live in communities directly north of states with commercialized marijuana. You have to talk about this. We have to await the research, which we're about to get a lot more of. I'll give you this if you want. Dr. Martin put this slide together. She did a big database query. We're about to learn so much more about weed. But right now, the unknowns in so many ways still outweigh the knowns. There's my book if anybody's interested in it. And here are references. Dang it. 6 minutes passed. I was trying to end at 4:20. 4 minutes of questions, 2 questions. And the rooms we call burning desires. Who's got something, especially something you don't agree with? Nobody affirm me. Somebody tell me something that you didn't like. Okay? Any questions in general? Sir?
And I know this doesn't fall under the peer review journal published, but the AAA study that came out a couple of years ago that talked about not being able to identify a specific level of THC that impairment. How do you deal with that?
You're going to have one of the most informed people in the country tomorrow talking on that with Sarah. Basically, what you have to understand is that so she'll go into the science. Here's the way people think. We all want to compare this to alcohol because Mason Tvert 12 years ago when he was a law clerk for a judge in Texas did a bunch of polling and determined that the message that resonated the best with female voters aged 28 to 36, which are those who are making up the election, is safer than alcohol. So it doesn't mean anything, but we want to make the comparison. And we have this wonderful 0.08 with booze. So we need a 0.08 for weed. It just doesn't exist. Sir.
Our town relies on the university, which brings in students a lot from Colorado every year, and a lot of this comes with them. How do we keep safe here from all of the legal marijuana coming from Colorado? Do we double down, or do we try and go the education route? Do we step up our enforcement, or do we try and educate?
The question's like in a town like this that's so dependent on the university and with all the kids coming from Colorado, what's the best strategy, doubling down or education? I got to tell you, I think I'll take the cop-out answer to this and say it's probably a bit of both. Kids today don't understand that this is an issue. If we can present it to them in a way that is relevant and they will understand it, it's so much easier to convince somebody of the truth than of a mistruth. It takes millions of dollars in long-term campaigns. We've done it with tobacco. But I also think that letting people know, hey, you're not in Colorado anymore. And this isn't something that we just laugh about. I mean, the trick, I don't know what restorative justice programs look like up here. I know you got a drug court in town, and you hate to see somebody who makes a dumb decision at 19 be saddled with a criminal record. But at the same time, I think that we do have to enforce what we've got, or else you're going to have, I mean, we've had an 800 and some increase in citations around public consumption in Denver because nobody gives a crap anymore. Because there's not a day that goes by that I don't see somebody smoking weed because our law enforcement just doesn't have the resources to enforce. So I think your answer is probably somewhere in the middle of that thing. Educate about today's weed in a way that's relevant to young people. And yeah, you got to enforce it so they know they're not back home. That's my thought. It's 4:30. I'm going to take my kids to a burrito. Thank you guys for sitting around for an hour and a half.
We'll see you tomorrow at 8 a.m. We are starting with breakouts, so make sure that you look at your agenda to see which rooms that you're in for your breakout sessions. So hope you all have a good night.